This is a lie that's been repeated over and over and over again that every conservative will now believe until the day that they die, because once you believe a lie that Trump has told you, you can never, ever, ever disavow that lie. The easiest way to pull the plug on this argument is if you really cared about saving money for the government, then the number one most efficient program to put money into is the IRS. So this American president is the worst in all of human history for the U.S. debt.
Obama tried to do this too, right? He tried to make cuts. It was like trivial cuts on the margins, shutting down old websites. At the end of the day, what's happened is clearly our government by itself is not sufficient to actually solve this problem. You know, I'm a first-generation immigrant. My parents came from Ghana. They waited in line. I'm experiencing this dynamic in the conversation between us where you're talking to conservatives, I'm talking to you.
Protests are erupting across the country. Some people believe that Trump is our best chance to save America. Others think he's the biggest threat to democracy. So tonight, we bring clarity. Up until now, we've only asked people on the street these questions, but in this special episode of The Nate Friedman Show, I'm joined by Destiny, who is known as the most skillful and seasoned debater on the left.
History moves in one direction, right?
Why?
Because of time?
His debate with Ben Shapiro made shockwaves, getting over 12 million views. Today, he goes head-to-head with Kaizen, a creator that Elon Musk calls a clear thinker. Kaizen is a repeat guest on Piers Morgan and gets hundreds of millions of views every month on his analyses.
Last 2 weeks of Senate confirmation hearings for Trump's cabinet have revealed to me exactly why I left the Democratic Party. Watch this.
Gentlemen, it's an honor to host this debate. My job is to talk as little as possible, but to also be as fair as possible. So the topics of today's debate include tariffs, DOGE, immigration, Ukraine, Russia, Israel, Palestine, DEI, and culture. The format of the debate is a dinner table conversation, just like millions of Americans are having every day. The only difference here is this argument might actually change someone's mind. Let's get into it. So to start off with Destiny, tariffs. Destiny, you believe tariffs are impeachment worthy. Can you explain why you believe that?
For the statement of impeachment worthy, I mean, I would say that the president was granted, I think, an understandable ability to take extra special measures in great times of national emergency. And I think that what he's done is he's taken the ability to do those measures, one of those being tariffs, and he's kind of fabricated a national emergency by claiming that because we have big trade deficits, it's somehow a national emergency, and now he's using that to unilaterally conduct economic policy as the president. Whether or not I think the tariffs are a good or bad idea, I know everybody knows my opinion on this. I think they're a horrible idea, especially the way that he's done it. He shouldn't be doing these unilaterally. These should be passed through Congress. The president is not the sole source of our econ policy in the United States of America.
Can you go into more of why you believe it's like a horrible idea, tariffs?
Internally, they lack consistency. They say that they want to bring back manufacturing, but then they say they're willing to cut deals with other countries. So I don't know what that means. If we cut another deal with another country, wouldn't that undermine our own manufacturing? They say that they want to use the tariffs to bring back manufacturing, which implies there's going to be a whole bunch more jobs here for, I guess, blue-collar workers or whatever. But then they also say that most of the jobs that come back here are going to be high-tech jobs because you're not going to have the old factory jobs of the past. So that's a delusion. They try to say that that we need like factories here so that people can build and work and do stuff here, but our unemployment is incredibly low. I think it's still at about 4.5%. So I have no idea where all these new workers are going to come from. They don't exist right now. And then the workers that we do have that likely would take those jobs, they're trying to deport in record numbers. So no part of it seems to make sense in any way, size, shape, or form. The actual economic analysis is also just completely devoid of any logical rationale, like the idea that just because we have a trade deficit with a country means that somehow we're losing, I think betrays a very poor understanding of macroeconomics. I mean, there's like a million things I could talk, but yeah, I'll just over there, yeah.
Sure. Kaizen, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, sure. So first, I think it's important to just zoom out and look at what the macro issue is that we're trying to solve, and then where does tariff fit into the strategy to resolve it. So I don't know what you call a national emergency, and I guess that's a bit of a qualitative assessment, but we have a 127% GDP to debt ratio, or debt to GDP ratio. That's the highest it's ever been. And with $37 trillion in debt, $2 trillion deficit, we need to restructure things in America. Otherwise, we're going to have a bona fide emergency. So first, do we agree that there's something that we need to head off at the pass, whether we agree that it's an emergency right now or it'll be an emergency later?
No. I think that this is given as a truism with no qualifiers ever. I would ask you very simply, what should the debt to GDP ratio be?
I know it's the highest that it's ever been, including wartime, right? So the highest it's ever been, even post-World War II, was 119%. And I think we could agree that there's a point where it is too high. Could I give you a specific number? I couldn't.
But it's not even a general number. Like, what's a country that's doing better than us? And then what's their debt to GDP ratio? I think that this is a truism that's given with zero thought. I don't think Trump's thought about it. I don't think Lutnick has ever given a justification. I don't think anybody has ever thought about it. It's just kind of like a truism. Like the debt is bad. Like what should our debt even be? Is 50% good or 70%?
Well, part of it is the issue is it's a confidence meter in a sense, right? So it reaches a point where the debt to GDP ratio is too high for anyone to want to take on American debt. Now,
when we say confidence meter,
so,
they
hold
don't.
on,
Oh yeah, go ahead.
just finish what I'm saying.
Sure.
So obviously, I can't discern from here what that point is, right? And for everyone, it's different. But there's a point where we basically go over the cliff, and we're trying to avoid that. So to the question of are there nations with a higher GDP to debt ratio that are doing fine? I don't know, genuinely. But the question is this something that we need to get a handle on at all? So if we don't even agree on that, then the discussion on strategy is kind of moot. But do you agree that this is something that needs to be resolved or not?
I don't know what we're even resolving it to. So like, for instance, when you said confidence meter, the USD was about as strong as it's ever been, despite supposedly this debt, being horrible and about to take us over a cliff. It was when Donald Trump started to take corrective measures on it that the USD started losing a lot of power, that the bonds market started to shake, and it made it look like other countries were losing faith in America. So I feel like there's a lot of truisms given about the debt or given about macro econ, but like when you look at any of the numbers, you can't find any justification for it ever at all. Like, and nobody can talk about it. It's just kind of like these are just truisms given for like political points, I feel.
Okay, so you don't think that this is proven to be an issue that we do need to prioritize right now?
I think that there is a responsible and healthy discussion to have around what should our debt look like, how much debt should we have, and what policy should we take to alleviate that. None of those conversations are happening right now in this administration because they don't even understand what the debt is or really anything about economics in general, I guess. Like, just for instance, because we have a trade deficit with a country, that doesn't mean we're subsidizing them. Trump says it over and over again. It doesn't mean we're losing out to them. Trump says it over and over again. And it doesn't mean that it's weakening our economy, but Trump says that over and over again. So how can you even begin to have a discussion on what the debt should look like if we don't even have a basic understanding of like what a trade deficit is, I guess?
Yeah. So where I agree with you is Trump administration has not been good about messaging some sort of comprehensive idea of what the debt should be, why it's too high, why we need to get a handle on it, and what the limits of that handle should be. So I agree with you there, and I'm not here
to be clear, real quick, we don't agree on that. I'm not saying they're not messaging on it. I'm saying they don't understand it.
Okay, and I don't know that they don't understand it. I'm curious what makes you confident that they don't understand it.
Because every single step they've taken has been bad for it.
Yeah, so this is one of those things where it's like I personally don't feel confident that I have such a strong grasp of macroeconomics that I could say that A, every move that they're making is illogical, and B, that they don't even have a strategy. What I can say is that I'm pretty confident that having a $37 trillion debt and $2 trillion deficit is unsustainable. And at minimum, we need to correct the trend, even if we think that at the absolute, like we can sustain 127% debt to GDP ratio. So with that being a given, the question is, what should we do about it? And I think a lot of the time when we talk about tariffs, we talk about them in isolation. And where I agree with you is the tariff strategy has been opaque if it's there at all. Right? We talk about tariffs in terms of wanting to reshore manufacturing, and then it turns about we need to turn it into some sort of methodology for creating reciprocal tariffs, and it's more about fairness, and then it's about blue-collar workers, and it's really unclear. But I know that the overall strategy is to at least cut the deficit to zero by increasing revenue on the revenue side through tariffs and reducing costs through DOGE, which we're going to talk about in a moment. And to me, that's something that Howard Lutnick has said. It's something that Scott Bessenson said. To me, that's at least a compelling directional approach to dealing with this. And I think it's very hard to assess where tariffs fit in the overall picture because we're also talking about things like deregulation. And yeah, as you mentioned, it's not as simple as, hey, we're going to put a tariff on this country and there's not going to be any negotiation past that. So there's been mixed messaging. I do like directionally, though, that someone is putting a stake in the ground and saying, hey, we need to resolve a deficit because at least intuitively, this doesn't seem like something that we can sustain indefinitely. Tariffs are supposed to at least help with that by bring back American manufacturing, and then that raises corporate tax revenues, then we can tax more on the corporate side. They've also said some things about cutting income tax below 150K and using tariffs to replace income tax. So for me, I just like that there's a president who's actually addressing this. And I think many of the American people feel the same.
I think they feel the same because they're being lied to constantly. So this American president is the worst in all of human history for the U.S. debt in terms of adding to the U.S. debt. So if you want to deal with the debt, there's two ways to do it. You can either raise more revenue, which he's opposed to doing because he wants to cut or he wants to extend the Trump tax cuts, or, and he's also caused an economic contraction to happen now, despite the fact that he came in with a booming economy. So the economy's gotten smaller, which means less tax receipts. He wants to extend the tax cuts, which have had a massive impact on our deficit. So you can either raise revenues, he's done the opposite of that in both worlds, or you can decrease your outlays, and it doesn't seem like this president is willing to cut any outlays either. So you have the fact that they asked for another $150 billion from the Pentagon, the fact that they're asking for trillions of dollars increase to the debt ceiling, and then the fact that, again, this is one of those internally inconsistent things. We're saying tariffs are going to raise revenue. Well, the only way that the tariffs would raise revenues and the ways that they calculated it is if the consumption remains the exact same, which it won't, because obviously people are going to adjust their consumption based on the tariffs. And two, why would you want them to make a lot of money on tariffs? Why would you want the U.S. to make money on tariffs if the whole point of the tariffs was so that people stopped ordering international goods and started ordering domestic goods? That doesn't make any sense, right? We'd want to reduce the consumption of international goods, which would reduce the amount we collect in tariffs. So even if it's not even directionally good, it's just all of it is just horrible. It's just all of it is horrible. None of it is actually furthering anything to reduce the debt or the deficit, which is why by the end of this admin, the deficit likely won't go down. The debt absolutely won't go down. And there will be a failure on both those fronts, just like there has been with DOGE, as we'll get to that. But I don't think any of the Trump people will even be willing to admit that.
So obviously it's difficult for us to prognosticate. I would say look, at the end of Trump's presidency, the debt and the deficit have not gone down. That is a failure. And then we'll just objectively know, because they said they were going to do this thing. They said that all these policies are meant to do this thing, and then they didn't do that thing. What I would say is that we need to consider the tariffs, again, as a toolkit in the overall toolbox. Because one of the things I don't even like about the framing is, hey, let's talk about tariffs. Because that doesn't make much sense to me. It's like, no, let's talk about what the economic strategy is and what piece tariffs serve there, right? So you mentioned, for example, that assumes that consumption remains even. But if tariffs raise prices, then consumption will go down because prices will just be too high, right? Well, then we have to consider other things, right? So if we deregulate, for example, and we make it cheaper for companies to actually make goods in the U.S., might prices actually remain the same and consumption remain the same? That's possible.
That is impossible. That will never be the case. I'll bet any amount of money right now, because in the United States, we just can't produce. We don't even have the companies necessary. The capex, the type of investment that we're looking to build those factories and train those people, we're at least a decade out in a lot of industries for this ever happening. There's no world where you peel back a couple regulations and all of a sudden magically the United States is competing with Thailand and China and Taiwan when it comes to manufacturing. That's never, ever, ever happening.
Okay. Well, I'm not so confident that's never going to happen. And at least we see early signs that people are attempting to make it happen. And that's why we see different companies trying to invest in America. Yeah,
companies have always been investing in America. Most of the investment that Trump tries to credit for came from the CHIPS Act.
So, Stephen, this debate's not going to go very well if you interrupt me and I don't interrupt you.
Sure.
So So we've seen Taiwan Semiconductor do that. Recently, this past week, we saw Saudi Arabia make investments. Obviously, that's more sovereign, not private companies. But we've seen many companies. We see Honda say that they're going to make the next Honda Civic over here rather than in Mexico. So we've seen companies at least making moves to try to reshore manufacturing. Whether it's going to happen by the time that Trump exits office, that's unknown, right? And then we have a timescale issue. But to say confidently, no, this is just never going to happen, I'm not sure how you can be so confident on that. I'm not confident. There's a level of confidence that I have, but it's not 100% in either direction. But the point is that moves are being made. We see early signs that companies are responding to it. And there's an open question of, is it going to be sufficient? And how much are tariffs going to lend to the strategy or take away from it? So look, my general note with economic discussions, I mean, even actual professional economists get this wrong. And this is one of the things where, honestly, I think what's underlying this whole debate for a lot of people is fundamentally, do you trust that this is a problem that needs to be solved? Do you trust the person trying to solve it? And do you trust the strategy that has been articulated? It sounds like where you're at is you don't trust that this is a problem that needs to be solved. You don't trust that Trump is a person to solve it. And you don't trust that there's a strategy. I trust that this is a problem to be solved. I'm unsure if Trump is the man to solve it. I am unsure on whether he has a correct policy to solve it because you haven't heard it thoroughly articulated comprehensively, but I think we need to do something because I don't think this is a sustainable track. And personally, I'm just happy that someone's trying to solve it at all.
Yeah, I don't know how we can say we're happy someone's trying to solve it at all when Trump has proven, he had his first whole term where he proved he was horrible on things like the debt and the deficit. He added more to the debt than any president prior to that. A lot of the debt that accumulated even under Biden's term was a result of the Trump Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, and a lot of the debt that we ended up, and a lot of the interest we paid on the debt that was accumulating under that. So there's no reason to believe that Trump would do anything good here because he failed on his first term. He's continuing to fail on his second term. Maybe something magical will change. The thing that bothers me the most when we say, is this something that we should talk about? In terms of like what is a healthy debt to GDP ratio, I think there probably is a good conversation to have there. And I think there's a good set of steps that we can probably take to alleviate some of the fiscal burden that we have in the United States. That conversation can't take place now because nobody has any idea what it should look like. A lot of people are deluded into thinking the debt should be zero. And a lot of people are now fixated on should we have a worldwide tariff policy that's been enacted unilaterally from the executive branch from a guy who has bankrupted casinos. And there's no reason to look at any of this and think that it's going to end positively. Nobody internationally thinks it's going to end positively. The markets don't think it's going to end positively. No foreign governments think it's going to end positively. Half the United States. Like, there's just... I mean, like, the frustrating part is that all of this will end up not working out in 4 years, and everybody's going to, on the conservative side, will be scratching their heads, like, thinking, like, well, who could have guessed? And it's like, well, we saw it didn't work in the first admin. He added record levels to the debt and the deficit, and now it's not going to work in the second admin. He's taking even more catastrophic steps. So I don't know what conversation, we can even realistically have about alleviating the debt now.
Trump on the campaign trail promised to hire Elon to cut waste, fraud, and abuse from the government. If you were to give DOGE a grade, how would you grade them?
Okay, so I'd say, DOGE's stated goal is to remove $1 trillion from the deficit on the spending side. Today, if we take their numbers to be accurate, they've saved $170 billion. Some of this is pending congressional approval to actually be concretized. But that's, I consider, a pretty good clip considering that they're less than 170 days even in office. Now, in order for them to save as much as they want to, I think they probably need to do more than just efficiency cuts, and then we get into more sensitive conversations about entitlements and things like that. My general thesis is, and this kind of goes back to the debt conversation and deficit conversation, something radical does need to be done. So I proceed from the basis that I'm happy something's being done at all. My biggest criticism of DOGE is I think the messaging has been really poor. It's been really unclear what their criterion is for making cuts or for laying people off. It's been unclear how much of this is politically motivated, like when we consider the stuff with USAID versus it actually about massive efficiency gains. That said, what I've seen from him is a level of flexibility when it comes to making cuts where they're actually not impervious to feedback and they're amenable to making changes. So, for example, I know that they cut about 10,000 jobs from Health and Human Services, and they ended up reinstating 20% of them because they realized, hey, we actually need those jobs. I think it was similar with the Nuclear Security Administration. They cut, I want to say something like over 100 or 177 jobs, and they ended up reinstating a lot of them because they realized they need them. So there are cases where they overcut, and obviously when people overcut, like, that's bad, but they've shown that they are willing to be dynamic and flexible with correcting those overcuts. And I also think that the way that they've been treating the layoffs in particular has been a lot more humane than they've been given credit for, because the vast majority of the employees who have been let go have received severance, in many cases 8 to 12 months of severance. And that runs contrary to a lot of a dialogue on, like, hey, people are just losing jobs and it's just complete chaos, and they're using a cudgel for everything. So overall, I would give them a B+. I think it's a little early. I know it's meant to be sunset by July 2026. And look, there's a clear objective goal. Either they cut $1 trillion or not, and then we can be much more objective about how much they cut and whether it was enough. But overall, I'm positive on the changes that they've made. I'm positive on the fact that they're willing to take feedback. And I think one thing that people don't understand about the way DOGE is structured is they don't actually have statutory authority to make cuts unilaterally. It's not like Elon or anyone else in that department is just going in and cutting things without consulting with the agency or department heads. So given that in many cases they have an engineer, a lawyer, and then some sort of liaison for DOGE embedded in the department, and the department is actually agreeing, hey, yeah, we can make these cuts. I'm just happy that there's some sort of influence in these departments that is looking at this with a fresh eye and recommending cuts. B, I'm glad that the departments are agreeing with those cuts and following through. And I think this was necessary. I think the question is just on the margins, are they doing as good of a job as the ideal DOGE could do? So for me, it's B+.
Yeah, that's the easiest F in the world. DOGE came in promising $2 trillion in cuts, and they've walked away with anywhere from 50 to 150 billion, maybe. I don't know in what world you miss your target by an order of magnitude and still manage to get a passing grade. Also, DOGE's mission was to come in and find waste, fraud, and abuse, not try to make personnel cuts in programs that they don't like. So they didn't even hit their original mission at all. I'm going to be honest. I think every liberal was a little bit scared to see DOGE come in and find a whole bunch of waste, fraud, and abuse in the government, because obviously that would look pretty bad. I did expect them to find some stuff. I'm actually astounded that they came in with like an open book to go through everything and came away with absolutely nothing. There was not a zero credible claim of waste, fraud, or abuse that DOGE came away with, despite the firings, despite going in and, kicking out security guards, despite getting to go through as much data as they wanted to. The only thing we've gotten is a worse understanding of a lot of these agencies, because Elon Musk himself has been involved in the proliferation of a lot of lies about them. For instance, spreading the lie that Social Security is paying out people that are over the age of 120 or whatever. This is a lie that's been repeated over and over and over again that every conservative will not believe until the day that they die, because once you believe a lie that Trump has told you, you can never, ever, ever disavow that lie. They didn't manage to find any credible amounts of waste or fraudulent behavior or abusive behavior. They just went through and they Control-F for DEI and cut every whatever program they felt like they didn't like. I think it's a cowardly way for Trump to try to curb the size of government rather than presenting to Congress, here are systematic cuts that I think we should make in large, or programmatic cuts that we should make in large government programs to save money. They haven't done that. They're just trying to fire random people to make savings. So, I don't know. They came in looking for waste, fraud, and abuse. It seems like they found none. I haven't heard of anything regarding that. No credible claims of that. And they missed their mark by at least an order of magnitude, maybe 2 orders of magnitude if they end up getting only, $20 billion or whatever worth of cuts approved by Congress. So I don't know what world that's ever, especially given all the political capital expended on it, all the drama related to it. I don't know what world that could ever be seen as a success in any way, size, shape, or form.
Cool. So it sounds like we have some facts to reconcile before we can even get to the subjective analysis. So let's just see if we agree on this. So I have heard from Howard Lutnick and Elon that the goal is $1 trillion. Maybe at some prior point they said $2 trillion, but my understanding is their most up-to-date goal is $1 trillion in cuts to a deficit. Have you heard differently? Because you said $2 trillion.
Elon himself stated $2 trillion multiple times. They might have walked that back to $1 trillion. Even at $1 trillion, it's still an order of magnitude miss in terms of the cuts they found they recommended. Yeah.
Okay, good. And do we agree that the goal is to sunset DOGE by July 2026? So any cuts made now is not actually...
Yes, but my understanding is
not actually complete with the process.
Yes, but my understanding is the majority of what they've suggested is basically done, that they've kind of taken a step back now. So they might find little things, but basically the bulk of the work is done at this point.
Okay, my understanding is not that. So my understanding is that Elon is a special government employee. He's there for 130 days. He's used up the majority of that, so he can't be full-time on the team. But they have other people in DOGE. They have Amy Gleason leading it now. She used to be in the government, or was in the government, and she's a more traditional full-time employee. And this work is going to continue until July of 2026, which means we have a full year to make up the gap between, you're calling it, 30 to 150 billion. They're saying on their website 170 billion. Probably the truth is somewhere in the middle. I don't know. And that there's a question of how much of this actually gets approved by Congress and concretized. But to say it's an F, for me, it just sounds hyperbolic, just because we're literally not at the finish line yet. And if we expected them to cut $1 trillion to $2 trillion, 130 days in, I think that was an unrealistic expectation. Now, if it is true, and I have not heard this, that the bulk of the cuts that can be made have already been made, then obviously that's a failure. But my understanding is no one is warranting that. The bulk of the work that Elon can do in this fiscal year has been done directly, but there's still a team there, right? There's still dozens of DOGE employees embedded in these departments continuing to make cuts. So again, this is one of those things where, unfortunately, the timing of this debate is such that we're a bit early in the process to assess the long-term impact of things like economic shifts or changes to spending. But I think to have a sense of proportionality, we're not even halfway in to the amount of time that's been outlaid to make the changes on the DOGE side, and to already call it a failure doesn't make sense to me.
Well, have they found any waste, fraud, or abuse?
Well, so the Government Accountability Office in 2022 said they identified $250 billion in improper payments. Majority of that was overpayment, right? So there's tons of...
Yeah, but what you just said, that was the Government Accountability Office, not DOGE.
And DOGE is looking into the particulars of what those improper payments were. So what I'm saying is there's a bucket of at least $250 billion here that we know that in 2022 was wasted. Now, how much of that is fraud? How much is that abuse? I don't know, but that's what DOGE is looking into now.
I don't think DOGE is looking into that. I think the Government Accountability Office, and I think that the Office of Inspector General is looking into that. The easiest way to pull the plug on this argument is if you really cared about saving money for the government, then the number one most efficient program to put money into is the IRS, of which they're trying to pull people out of. There's some $400 to $600 billion annually. That's every single year of money out there that the IRS just can't go after because they don't have the manpower for it. And Republicans gleefully try to pull employees out of it or take employees out of the IRS, as Trump just bragged about it. So, I mean, like, I just don't think there's any real genuine effort there to actually save money, because if they were, they would just fund the IRS.
Okay, so there's a discussion to be had about what should they be doing instead, but let's not talk about what they have done, because you think they haven't done anything. So at minimum, there's the $20 to $30 billion in untagged payments that were identified, and we don't know where the money went. We don't know what it was for. We don't know if it was coded to the budget, but it was identified that, hey, this is a very simple thing. For anyone who's ever worked at a corporation where you've had to pay things on behalf of the company, when you pay for things on behalf of the company, you tag it. You just like tag
They
it
do that in the government. Every time that DOGE brought that up, it was a lie. Every single time it was a lie.
My understanding is it's not a lie.
That's fine. It is a lie. That's why there is no prosecution that's been referred. That's why nobody's talking about specifically
but hold on,
anything.
let me just finish. So you're saying it's a lie. Let me tell you how, if it were true, it would work. It's literally, there's a field that's optional where you can indicate what the payment is for. It was not indicated. And this doesn't mean that there was a mass amount of fraud, but it was one of these very simple things where, hey, the systems were not properly designed to make sure that we have accountability and transparency over how every single dollar was spent. Now, how much of that is incompetence? How much of that is malfeasance? I don't know. You're saying it's completely a lie, and I guess I don't know what the implication here is, that every single payment is tagged and we know exactly where every dollar went.
They know government stuff. Right? If you know anybody that works in government or does anything, they're pretty carefully accounted for. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know what. If appeal to authority, I don't know if like someone in government who's told you this is a lie, but at minimum, if we agree that we trust the GAO and we trust that when they say that there's $250 billion in underpayments, overpayments, and payments that they don't know where it went, then the question is, okay, well, how much of that $250 billion at least has DOGE captured? I'm identifying 20 to 30 billion and saying, hey, we know that, or allegedly, according to them, and you don't believe them, but I'm taking it at face value, they're saying it was not tagged, and now it's getting tagged. So that's a very simple change that's been made, that it doesn't get us all of the way there, but it's a demonstrable difference in moving the needle on actually cutting the amount of spending that the government is doing. In addition to that, I mean, the Social Security Administration for years has identified that yeah, there is fraud in Social Security, there is fraud in payouts, and DOGE has been on top of looking at that too. So unfortunately, it feels like there's just a bit of an unbridgeable divide, because if you're just saying it's a lie, like, I'm actually interested in how you can prove the negative here. Like,
well, it's super simple on my side. So when you're talking about those mistags of payments, okay, fine. Let's say that there was some fraudulent behavior there. Who's been recommended for charges? What is the FBI or the DOJ going after? The answer for these is always going to be nobody and nothing, because all of it is a lie. Whether or not there's like a payment tagged on a database, anybody that's worked with a sophisticated enough system knows that there's sometimes multiple systems. Sometimes stuff is tagged, sometimes it's not. Just because it's not tagged doesn't necessarily mean that it's fraudulent, wasteful, or abusive, or that somebody else is accounting for it. A really great example of this is the claims that Elon Musk and Trump have made about the Social Security Administration paying people that are over the 120 years old or whatever. There is a file externally that is the SSA updates called the DMF, the Death Master File. That file they'll update sometimes with cause of death or death that other agencies or creditors can kind of like use just to look at it to help them monitor stuff. That's not the same record, for instance, though, that the Social Security Administration uses to pay people out. The idea that we're paying thousands of people who are already dead was a total lie that was said over and over again, and is still said to this day by the majority of conservatives, by Trump and by Elon. But when you actually read, because the SSA has its Office of Inspector General, you can read the report. This has been known that updating that Death Master file sometimes is like really difficult for a variety of reasons. It doesn't mean there are fraudulent payments going out. When you're talking about payments going out as a result of inappropriate payments, my understanding is about 60% of those are recovered, 40% aren't. Sometimes it could be as simple as like a person dies and then an SSA check goes out like the next day, and then they have to like recover it. Most of the time, it's pretty easy to do. It's pretty trivial. I don't think DOGE is helping recover any of this. And like I said, if there was any actual like waste, fraud, or abuse, then I would expect we would see some type of criminal charge or something recommended to the DOJ, and that just hasn't happened, and it won't happen.
Yeah, so I mean, again, we're prognosticating about whether it will happen. We're very early into the administration. Maybe it happens. Maybe they actually do prosecute people. And in many cases, I don't think a prosecution is needed, because if it's simply waste and it's simply error and it's simply entropy, you don't need to prosecute someone for that all the time. As you just acknowledged yourself, sometimes there's many systems. Some of them are antiquated. Some of them are not talking to each other. And even in the case that 60% of these funds are recovered, 40% are not, then there's a 40%, there's a largesse that we can actually recover and we can actually be looking into. So
fund the SSA.
Sorry?
Stop pulling employees in from the SSA. Fund the SSA.
Yeah, it might not be an issue of funding the SSA. It might be an issue of making the SSA more efficient and actually updating the systems and updating this DMF, as you pointed out. Or, as I understand it, there are systems that are coded on really old code called Cobalt. And there's not many coders who are actually coding Cobalt anymore. So it's like, why are we using old systems? So some of this is just modernizing the systems that we have in government and getting off of old software licenses we're not using anymore, canceling old contracts that we're not using anymore, and just modernizing and making things more efficient. And the proof of that being done effectively wouldn't mean necessarily that people are going to jail. The proof of that would be that the actual amount of spending goes down. So again, as I said before, the proof of this should not be that people are going to jail over waste, fraud, and abuse. Well, the fraud for sure. But the proof of this should be that the actual number is going down. And you've acknowledged that there's somewhere between 30 and 150 billion that they actually have saved. So there's something. It's not nothing, as you've been saying sometimes. They're reporting that's $170 billion in saving. Even if the truth is somewhere in between, even if we cut it at halfway, let's say we take the halfway point and it's somewhere between 80 and 120 billion, that's substantive. And my question to you, Stephen, is do you think that there should be well, actually, it's not fair to say that because you did say that there should be a plan presented to Congress and that's the way that we should do it. I would say, well, we've tried that so many times. The best that we've been able to save is like $30 billion. And I'm glad that there's some sort of different approach where we're bringing in people from private industry. We're focusing on not just conventional government planning to actually reduce the amount that we spend and actually trying to modernize systems, make them more efficient, and just update government. So, yeah, that's why I give it a B+. I can understand why you wouldn't want to give it a B+. I don't understand how you can give it an F, given that we're literally not at July 2026.
DOGE came in to find waste, fraud, and abuse. They didn't find waste, fraud, and abuse. They came in to make suggestions for cuts to programs because Republicans have given up on trying to govern this country. If Republicans want to cut from the government, if they actually want to decrease the amount that they spend, then you go to government to do government. You don't get to bring in a guy who's frying his brain on ketamine to try to make a whole bunch of arbitrary cuts in personnel because you're too lazy or stupid to figure out how to actually write the bills to cut the departments. I don't like this idea that conservatives go, well, it was too hard, so we brought in a guy unilaterally to just start hacksawing stuff, and this is our way of doing it. DOGE was brought in to find waste, fraud, or abuse, not reread to me in a less coherent voice things that are on Government Accountability Office or Office of Inspector General reports from 2022 or 2023. It's a waste of money. It's a demonstration of a lack of ability to do business. Elon Musk became everybody's worst middle manager. Anybody that's worked in private industry knows how annoying it is to get a random email from some C-level exec saying, send me 5 things that you worked on this week. Like it was so annoying that half the cabinet heads were like telling their departments. I think Kash Patel, maybe Hegseth was saying like, guys, don't waste your time responding to this. This is stupid. Okay, this is dumb. It was a total failure in every single like size of the way you can measure it up. It was a failure. They came in looking for waste, fraud, and abuse. They came away with personnel cut recommendations because they don't know how to recommend these things to Congress. And the small things that we want to take credit for DOGE, like you're talking about optimizing systems, that department was already in place. Obama put it in place. It's called the USDS, which is what DOGE kind of like became a cancer onto. It was the United States Digital Service, which was supposed to go around and optimize government systems. If they want to, I don't like this because Trump will suggest something crazy and stupid, and then when it comes in, it fails. Everybody tries to walk it back to a more reasonable program. If DOGE had come in saying, we want to help the USDS make the federal government more efficient, and we think that there are ways that we can do that, okay, well then fine, that's cool. That wasn't what was promised. What was promised was Elon Musk saying $2 trillion in cuts from a $1.7 trillion discretionary budget, which is what our spending is on the discretionary level, by finding waste, fraud, and abuse. The numbers that he cited over and over again were crazy. And at the end, we came away with drama relating to shuttering departments unilaterally, like USAID, or we came away with personnel cut recommendations, which are neither waste nor fraud nor abuse. So it's an easy F.
Yeah, so I would say that personnel cuts can be cutting waste. I mean, if there's a certain amount of people doing a job and we can do the job with fewer people, then anyone above that we don't need. And that's unfortunate because obviously it sucks for those people who are doing the job to be removed from the job. But this is very normal in private industry. You say, hey, we actually have too many employees to do something that now either due to better systems or better technology, we can do with fewer people. So I would say that laying off people does constitute removing waste. I'm not sure what you consider waste that wouldn't be personnel cuts. There's obviously examples of waste that are not just personnel cuts, but I would say personnel cuts falls under the category of waste. So to say, oh, well, all you did is cut employees, that's not actually resolving waste, fraud, and abuse, I think is categorically not true.
I don't think there's any way
let me just finish what I'm saying. Some of what you said, I mean, Elon being fried on ketamine and Republicans are not trying to govern the country. I mean, this is like theorizing about people's state of mind and ad hominem. I don't think that's really necessary. And I'm not really interested in speculating on what Elon's mental state is or Republicans' motivations. But again, we go back to the higher level problem, which is that we have a massive deficit. in my mind, we need to get a handle on it. At least directionally, we need to get a handle on it so it doesn't increase. We've tried the traditional approaches that you've identified. We've tried the conventional government agencies, audit other agencies, and then make recommendations to Congress, and then Congress approves those changes, and it hasn't been working. And that's why we need to, as annoying as it could be to have a private industry middleman involved in the picture, look to private industry. And this is not completely without precedent. I mean, Henry Ford helped the government, Howard Hughes helped the government. We've had business magnates help the government at stages in the U.S.'s development before.
Now, whether you think Kaizen or Destiny is winning the debate so far, one thing is for sure, your data shouldn't be part of the argument. This episode is sponsored by Private Internet Access, the VPN trusted by millions to protect their digital freedom. Now, right now, every time you browse, stream, or scroll, your IP address, location, and private info are just floating out there for your ISP, advertisers, government censors, or even hackers on the same Wi-Fi to grab. Now, PIA encrypts your connection with a secure tunnel and hides your IP address. This shields your digital life from those who seek to exploit your private information. And it's not just your privacy. You want to stream that show that isn't available in your region? Get cheaper flights or block ads? Done. Now, with servers in 91 countries in all 50 states, you can access more content than ever before anywhere in the world. Now, plus PIA never logs your activity ever. That's not just a promise. It's been proven in court and verified by a third-party audit from Deloitte. PIA works on Windows, Mac, iOS, and Android, plus it protects unlimited devices at once. Go to piavpn.com/Nate Friedman to get 83% off plus 4 free months. That's just $2 a month to have peace of mind every time you use the internet. Now, don't browse naked. PIA's got your back.
So the question, again, is not whether Elon's on ketamine or whether we should be bringing individuals from private industry. The question is, how do we actually get this deficit in hand? And I haven't seen any public sector approach that's been successful. I see a private industry success that is at least more successful than every approach prior, because the most savings that we've ever gotten is around 30 billion. And if that's a low end of your range, then DOGE is actually already doing better than they've done in the past. And I think that's something that shows early signs of promise. Again, if we don't get it through Congress, a lot of this doesn't actually end up mattering at the end of the day. But I would like to hear, what is an approach that we haven't tried, that we should try, that doesn't involve private industry, that you think would work?
A real approach would be having people come together when you go to make the budget and suggesting these are programs that we need to make. We actually need to make programmatic cuts to huge parts of the federal government. But the problem is nobody wants to do that because they know that U.S. citizens generally enjoy those programs, and so they're too cowardly to actually cut from any of those programs. So that's one way to do it, is to cut from the programs. The second way to do it is to keep the programs the same size, but to continue to grow the economy. And Trump is doing the exact opposite of both of those. Our economy is contracting right now because he's destroying faith in the USD and faith in the United States at large across the world, and because we're reducing our tax receipts, our revenue, by way of economic contraction, and because he wants to extend the tax cuts for the Trump Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. So again, if we were ever going to have a conversation on the debt, on the deficit, I think that we could have that conversation, but now we're even further from having that conversation because we're fixated on whatever DOGE is or whatever this is. We're not going to, like, if the deficit, the budget deficit, and of course the debt will grow, but if the deficit grows or stays the same, will you admit that it was an utter failure the entire 4 year? If after a year or two, will you say, okay, well, this has failed, this is not working?
Yes, because then enough time will have expired for us to see the objective result, and the objective result was not met. So absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. And just to be clear, Stephen, I mean, obviously we don't know each other well, but you know, when you say like conservatives or Republican, I consider myself neither of those. I know you're not necessarily saying I am, but we're addressing a party that's not in the room, and I'm not here to argue on their behalf. What I'm saying is that there's a problem that needs to be addressed, and the way that the first solution that you propose, which is that we propose programmatic adjustments, we've tried that. And it hasn't worked.
No, the Republicans aren't trying that.
No, Republicans and Democrats don't do that.
The Democrats do try, but Republicans are half of Congress.
And all of Congress doesn't do it. And we don't accomplish it. And it doesn't seem to matter who has the majority. It doesn't get done. Obama tried to do this too, right? He tried to make cuts. It was like trivial cuts on the margins, shutting down old websites. At the end of the day, what's happened is clearly our government by itself is not sufficient to actually solve this problem. We need a creative approach to solving this problem. This is, hopefully we can agree, undoubtedly creative. It has some clear downsides. What I agree with you is this public spectacle around DOGE and like constantly like people arguing on X about whether a program should be cut and all the partisanship around it is sad, unnecessary, and distracting. So that's why for me, it's like I'm not willing to give it an A because the messaging has been so politicized and so hyperbolic. But we need something different. And you're saying the Republicans won't get in line. To me, neither house seems to be getting in line with it because no cuts are not popular because, yes, many Americans like these programs that we have and no one likes to have things taken away. And what I've seen, to your point about like programs getting cut, that's what DOGE has been doing. Now, if we have a disagreement on whether these programs that have been cut should be cut, I think it's a healthy discussion to have. Like we can talk about USAID, whether that should be removed. We can talk about the departments that have been downsized. We can talk about Health and Human Services getting rid of 2,000 employees. All these things are reasonable discussions to have. But what I don't think is a reasonable discussion to have is discussions about whether it's the Democrats or the Republicans and talking about these hypotheticals where all the Congress people get together and solve, because it just hasn't been working. And frankly, as an American taxpayer and someone who's been observing government from the outside for years now, it's like, I'm just glad that we're trying something different.
This is the Republicans throwing their hands up, and it's the meme comic of we've tried nothing and we're all out of ideas. If Republicans want to govern, the country is here to be governed. But as long as half the country is just having an epic time following Trump into, whatever abyss they're happy to follow him into, nothing is going to get done. Like, none of the DOGE stuff is probably going to get solidified by Congress. Most of the people in Congress are not happy with any of the suggested cuts. It's just nothing. Like, when Republicans decide, okay, well, we have to actually come together and we need to start writing legislation, then something will get done. It's not a both sides issue. Democrats are able to pass way more legislation. The economy and the budget, both, so fiscally and the economy, tend to do better under Democrats. Every time a Democrat comes back into office, they have to waste the first year or two trying to bail them out of whatever catastrophe the last Republican got them into. When Obama came in, it was trying to recover from the housing crisis. When Biden came in, it was recovering from COVID. And then afterwards, you get a Republican who came in. Look, you've got Donald Trump coming in now. He came in off of Obama's heated economy and tried to take credit for the economy growing under that, even though Trump added record levels to the debt and deficit. And now Trump has come in after the economy was doing great under Biden. We were dominating OECD and G7, like in every conceivable way. And now he's like managed to cause an economic contraction after a quarter. It's frustrating to see a Democrat comes in and has to clean up after the last Republican. The last budget the last budget surplus we had was under Clinton, was under a Democrat. It's just frustrating. The Democrat has to come in, clean up the mess. The Republicans come in, they make more and more of a mess. They spend like crazy. And then everybody goes, wow, both parties in the United States sure are messed up right now. Like, it's just that blows my mind.
Yeah. I didn't really want to make this a partisan conversation, but I think the framing of, Republicans mess it up and then Democrats clean it up, I don't think that's accurate at all. I mean, even if we talk about Clinton, creating this surplus, he inherited the conditions for a surplus to be created. And for sure, he stewarded that, but those the deregulation efforts that created the economy that was booming by the time he entered office and early when he entered office, that was instantiated by Reagan. So if we're going to say that, it's the Democrats just inherit messes and then they spend the first few years cleaning things up, I don't think that's true. In Bush's case, I think that was true because I think Bush was one of the worst presidents of all time. And I think Obama had to recover from Bush, and we saw the housing crisis.
And Trump inherited Obama's economy and took credit for it and massively spent. He did a huge tax cut without pairing it with any spending cuts.
And they all spend, right? And there's been no
Republicans spend more.
I'm pretty sure in
Bush on both wars and Trump. Yeah, sorry, God.
In point of fact, I'm pretty sure Biden actually spent more than Trump. Now, obviously, there was a black swan event in COVID, and that. Yeah, Biden had all of COVID. Trump only had part of COVID. But I'm pretty sure, in point of fact,
most of the
Biden
extra spending under Biden was because of the tax cuts from Trump, the Trump Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that they're trying to renew now. Like, all of the extra interest on the debt and then all of the extra basically lost revenue from that was passed from Trump that was carried over into Biden's admin.
Yeah, but we can't do this thing where Republicans are not responsible for any success that they ride the tailwinds of, and Democrats are not responsible for any failures that they have to ride the headwinds of.
I'm not saying that. I'm saying that I can point to measurable Republican failures over and over again.
Yeah, but I'm saying you say Trump inherited Obama's economy.
Yes.
And I'm like, yeah, he stewarded the economy that he had. It didn't go off a cliff, and there's something to be said for that. And similarly, Clinton did the same with Reagan.
So Republican, he didn't steward the economy. He overheated it. And then they cried about inflation a few years later. He came in under Obama, and the markets went from growing 10, 15% every year to 20 to 25% every year for 3 years. And he did that with a massive deficit spend by cutting all these taxes and not pairing them with any government spending cuts. And then the same Republicans now want to come in and say, well, Trump's going to be the guy to save our budget. He couldn't do it when the economy was going well. Why would we expect him to do it now?
Well, I would say in the case of like overheating the economy, remember, a lot of these changes were made in, as we both acknowledge, prosperous economic times, and then COVID hit, and then the same tax cuts and things that they did in times pre-COVID were not that effective post-COVID. And I will say, to Biden's credit, I think he inherited a really difficult situation and he prevented it from going completely off of a cliff. But again, when we say, if we talk about what level of confidence that we should have that Trump is able to resolve the debt and the deficit, given that he didn't do it the first time, I'm not confident that he was even trying. I think he was taking the economy that he had and trying to add more gas to it. And he did that until the point where it was no longer a viable option per COVID. And when we say that, Trump is inheriting an economy that was booming under Biden, I don't think that was the experience of a lot of Americans on the ground. I mean, yeah, I guess equities were doing well, and I guess some of the top line was looking really good. But a lot of the reason why Trump got elected in the first place is because the average American, the cost of their groceries and their gas and their eggs and the things that they actually experience on a day-to-day basis were going up. And then over the longer term, the cost of houses were going up because interest rates were so high too. So even this framing of, he inherited this booming economy, I guess it depends on what you call economy, but the actual economic experience of the average Americans was not good under Biden, and that's exactly why Trump got elected. And so again, I'm just talking about this fundamental framing of, things were good, and then Trump either came in and he just rode that high, or he messed it up after things were good. I think it's demonstrably not what happened last year.
I think you can look at literally any economic indicator, and every single thing on paper will agree with the assertion that I'm making. And I just want to say it's a fantastic way to frame Trump's first 4 years as saying they were bad because he wasn't even trying when he was the president of the United States of America. But
I would say it wasn't a priority. Like, as I recall, debt and deficit were not as much of a priority. And I don't think it's been honestly a big priority for any president in terms of actually trying to make substantive changes. I mean, maybe it's something that you mentioned in a campaign. Everyone says I want to cut the deficit, but I haven't seen anyone actually make really substantive changes to try to do that. And I don't think Trump one had much of an emphasis on that. I would
argue that Biden expanding the IRS workforce by, I think they tried to do 80,000 people, would have been a really big step, although I think the Republicans have defanged that almost entirely now. And then I would say that at least the Inflation Reduction Act, the fact that they tried to pass legislation that had government spending that was offset by cutting part of the government, I would say that was an effort. And then you see things that Trump is trying to take credit for now that you mentioned earlier, all these investments into the United States from Taiwan chip factories or whatever. A lot of those are largely spurred on by the fact that Biden passed the CHIPS Act, which was more than just a tariff, but it actually provided for large-scale subsidies for domestic manufacturing investments from foreign investors. So I mean, I don't know. I like Trump a long time ago. I mean, there's videos of him saying that the economy seems to run better under Democrats. I mean, I agreed with him then. I think it's still largely true, but I guess we'll see after the end of these 4 years how people try to rationalize away everything that's happened so far.
So there are millions of people in the U.S. who are here illegally. What should be done with those who are already here? And what, if anything, should change to prevent illegal immigration moving forward? Would you like to go first?
Sure, yeah. So we touched on, or Stevens touched on this super briefly when you talked about deporting the people who are doing a lot of the jobs that actually are necessary for the economy. And I agree, that's something that needs to be reckoned with if we are going to deport people. But before we even talk about things like the economy, or some people incorrectly believe that immigrants are committing crimes, and that's not true, or at least not at a higher rate than the average American, I think fundamentally and instinctually what's going on is a lot of people just feel like it's unfair to allow illegal people to enter the country illegally. And to give you a very simple analogy, it's almost as if you're standing in a line, right? So let's say you're at an event and you're standing in a line, and you're standing in a line not because someone is wagging their finger and saying that you should do it, but because there's a basic understanding of it. There's a social contract that we all stand in the line, even if we don't like it, and we wait our turn. The perception is that illegal immigrants are not waiting their turn. And it's from a humane point of view, I totally understand a lot of these people are leaving desperate situations. A lot of these people are just like everyone trying to live a good life, and they want to live it in America. But the reason why America is actually so desirable is because we are a nation of law and order. We've actually created a system where we have relatively reliable judiciary system and legislative system and executive branch, and they work together, unlike a lot of these countries that people are coming from, especially in Central and South America. So not only does it feel unfair to the average American to watch so many people just bypass the rules, while, by the way, there are many people who are trying to enter the country legally and not willing to break the rules, it also undermines the very thing that makes America desirable to be in the first place. Because if it's a nation of law and order, and we're allowing people to enter the country while violating law and order, then very soon the community that people are trying to break into is not actually desirable anymore. So from my standpoint, this is about fairness, and it's actually not a moral claim. It's a claim about what actually creates a sustainable community. And I don't think it's sustainable to have a community where we have this perpetual underclass of people who the only difference between this underclass of people and the other and legal immigrants is that this underclass of people managed to make it into the country. This underclass of people is now getting actually abused because they're working jobs under the table. A lot of the time they're getting scammed. A lot of the time, they don't have worker protection because they're undocumented. And I don't think it's a good situation for those people. I don't think it's a good situation for people who are legally. I don't think it's a good situation for people who want to be in the country legally either. So in my opinion, look, we can't do this in the middle thing where we have like second-class citizens in the country and we say, oh, well, they're providing, essentially we're saying cheap labor. Like, oh, they're building our houses and they're farming our crops and they're doing jobs that Americans don't want to do. We need to either legalize all of them or we need to remove them all from the country. So if we look at these two branches, like, okay, well, what's the relative upside and downside of this? The upside of keeping these people in the country is certainly from a humanitarian point of view, it's more palatable because no one wants to force 10 to 20 million people to leave the country. They have communities here. They have bonds here. It would feel really bad. No one wants to see women and children crying as ICE kicks down doors and kicks them out of the country. But what we would lose there is a fundamental sense of trust in American systems of law and order. And I think that it would actually not just create internal distrust, it creates external distrust too. Because imagine, I'm a first generation immigrant. My parents came from Ghana. They waited in line. They followed the rules, they came here, they continue to follow the rules. So that would be the upside and the downside there. On a humanitarian front, it feels better, but I think from a social compact point of view, it's worse. The other alternative is you remove them all from the country. Now, I think a lot of the time, my criticism of the way conservatives talk about this is it just lacks compassion. It's about, hey, let's forcefully remove them here. They're illegals. Like even the terms that they use are just really unsavory. I would like to see us find a solution where we actually incentivize people to leave the country of their own volition by actually just enforcing the law. Like it shouldn't be legal for corporations to employ people under the table. It shouldn't be legal for people to enter the country. So I'm glad that we have locked down the border. I think that's something that Trump has done objectively well. To your question of like, how do we prevent this from happening in the future? I think we should be incentivizing them to self-deport by actually paying them to self-deport. I think that would be a lot more palatable and from a humanitarian standpoint and logistically more feasible. And I know they actually offered $1,000 per illegal immigrant who self-deports. I don't think that's enough. I think it goes $1,000 goes further in a lot of these countries that people are coming from than America, but it's still not enough. But yeah, I would like us to raise the amount that we incentivize these people, help pay them $5,000 and give them a time frame where they get to choose when they leave. But this in-between zone where we allow people to be here as this weird underclass, second-class citizens, and then we rationalize it economically, it goes against the spirit of America, and it's not sustainable, and I think it needs to be resolved in this administration.
Yeah, I think that factually, for illegal immigrants, they are fiscally beneficial because a lot of them pay into government budgets. We don't get them generally in their child years, so we're not making big investments in them to raise them up to their tax-paying years. And then economically, they're beneficial because we're hungry for workers in the United States like crazy. Our unemployment has been incredibly low for long periods of time. The idea of deporting 10 to 20 million people is just wholly unrealistic. I think it's a fantasy wet dream by conservatives that it just serves some emotional end. It would just be disastrous in so many different ways. The additional funding we would need for ICE and CBP to do it, the additional funding we would need for, I think Texas was trying to volunteer giant facilities to hold people, the processing, everything, it would just be a disaster. I feel like the best way to do it would be, nobody wants to actually tackle this politically, but it would be some kind of like path to amnesty. If you want to make them pay a fine or something, that's fine. If you want to restrict them to just having green cards instead of ever becoming citizens, whatever. But I think some type of path to amnesty where they can stay in the communities they're already at, they can continue, paying for whatever housing, paying into whatever communities, paying whatever taxes they do, but just giving them some kind of tax ID or number and then more formally tracking them. I think that that's like the no-brainer solution if you actually want to solve the problem. Everything relying on deporting everybody, I just think is fantastical. Conservatives will say things like, we need a big wall with a big, beautiful door. I haven't heard any of these conservatives talk at all about making immigration into the country any easier. I haven't heard any of them talk about the fact that it takes 20 or 30 years for a legal person to legally immigrate from some of these South American countries or from Mexico into the United States. So it seems like at the end of the day, they just want to kick out a bunch of people. They have no alternative plan to replace them, and then they're just going to pretend that somehow that's all going to work. And I just think that would be a catastrophe on like 7 different levels.
So before we talk about this, I'm experiencing this dynamic in the conversation between us where you're talking to conservatives, I'm talking to you. So what about my suggestions that we incentivize self-deportation by paying them more? I
mean, my response would be the same. It would be, why would we destroy all the markets that these people overwhelmingly work in like that? Where are the workers going to come from?
We can import them legally.
So would you be in
That's what we used to
favor
do.
then of dramatically increasing the amount of immigrants that we accept or making it much easier to immigrate here?
100%.
Okay.
Yeah.
If that was a position that anybody else took, I think I would probably be okay with that. Although at that point I would say, why deport somebody, just have them reapply? Why not just do that? That basically sounds like amnesty with more steps.
No, so I wouldn't say you necessarily bring back the same exact group of people that you just deported. I would say, hey, you get back in the line, but you do get penalized because there are people who have not broken the rules to get into the U.S., who are willing to do the same job, who are willing to enter here through legal means. So I wouldn't say it's amnesty for the same group, because I think we're talking about a different group of people.
But then why would we shuffle?
Let me just finish what I'm saying. One group of people came here illegally, and they're being removed from the country. The other group of people is here trying to come into the country legally, and I agree we need to make that significantly easier. And we need to have some sort of criteria for admitting people legally into the country that is transparent and needs-based. So if people are saying that, hey, illegal immigrants farm crops and, they build houses and all these things, I agree. They're providing tons of value to America. But let's have people come into the America on the right foot by following the rules and doing those jobs. And there's plenty of people in the world who would love to come in America and do those jobs properly, legally. So for me, it's like, okay, well, maybe the deeper question here, I'm going to say, and you let me know if it's not really a concern for you, but I think the deeper question here is, why would we cause economic disruption given that these people are integrated into our economy? And I would say it's the price of fairness. It's a price of restoring trust in our systems of law and order. And yeah, to me, it's like, if it would cost us $100 billion, $200 billion, some contraction of the economy, I would actually say that's worth it long term. Because I think part of the reason we have so much polarization and division, and one of the reasons why now twice Trump has gotten elected on a campaign that makes immigration the top issue, is because I think intuitively people just feel, hey, this is not how we do things in America. We don't get to selectively enforce rules. We don't get to just turn a blind eye. We don't just talk about freedom. We also talk about responsibility, because that's what made this country so great that people want to join it in the first place. So yeah, I mean, again, I'm going to continue to push back every time talking conservatives, because I'm Kaizen. I'm not conservatives. I'm not these other people.
I understand. I'm sorry, but I mean, obviously I'm speaking to largely the conservative argument. I mean, if you want to talk about fairness, it's hard because you're not defending, but you're saying that Americans care about this in the same breath. Trump is a 34-time convicted felon who's dismissed cases against him, impeded his own investigations, and is engaged in more overtly corrupt forms of lawfare than anybody, probably combined, every single president in U.S. history. So the idea that Americans have some intuitive feeling about fairness is just completely and totally unsubstantiated, in my opinion. Number one. And then number two, again, if you want to fine people because you think something's not fair or whatever, I agree that illegal immigration, it's not fair, I guess, that they came in illegally, but the amount of economic harm that you would cause to this country, if we were a shining beacon of law and order, through and through in every way, then I could see maybe there being some argument for it, but not with this president elected a second time. Absolutely not.
Okay, well, now we open Pandora's box and we're talking about Trump as a person and, his legal breaches or ethical breaches and the Stormy Daniels case and these 34 convictions. I personally don't want to go there. I feel like it's been litigated till kingdom come. I don't know that we're going to convince anyone during this, and I think there's better things
Sure,
to
I only bring that up in response to the
but,
idea that we're the law and orders nation. It seems like we are pretty flexible on that right now. So,
well, I think we've been flexible on it across every president, Democrat and Republican.
Nobody compares to the current one, not even remotely close. Yeah.
When we talk about this specific issue, which is people coming into the country illegally. And I don't want to blow out the conversation by talking about Trump and whether
even Reagan suggested amnesty, right?
Yeah, he did. And I think it was actually a mistake. He didn't just suggest amnesty. He gave amnesty in California. And I think that artificially distorted the political environment there. And that's why I'm actually considering moving from LA, because I think it's become a place that doesn't respect law and order and has a ton of inefficiency and is actually squandering a lot of the largesse that it naturally has. So I think that's actually the effect of providing amnesty. It's it erodes the social fabric fundamentally in a way that I think is worth actually economic disruption. So I would personally say, yeah, I'd be willing for my life to be harder for a few years because we actually did things the right way. I'll be willing for my life to be harder if we said, hey, we're going to show these people the door as compassionately as we can. We're going to have them self-deport by enforcing the laws and providing incentives as compassionately as we can. And we reset the deck and we do this properly, because no president has been willing to do it properly. I will say, as a critique of Trump, he has not talked about reforming the legal immigration process at all. And I think that's a failing, because I think the way that comes across is, hey, not only do you not care about immigrants more generally, because it connotes this undertone of like, some sort of xenophobe. I'm not saying that's what he is, but that's what it can look like to a lot of people. I agree that illegal immigrants are providing a lot of value, and we need to get that value from somewhere. I'm just saying we can get it from legal immigrants. And as a point of fairness, those legal immigrants should be the people who have been waiting in line patiently to get into the country the right way, not people who broke the law and are already here and for whom it's inconvenient to leave the country because we started enforcing the law.
Sure, but if Donald Trump suggested tomorrow he can push a button to deport 20 million people with no path to getting anybody else in here, would that be something you would support?
Sorry, say the question again.
Let's say that we could push a button tomorrow and deport 20 million people, but there was no realistic mechanism to replace even a tenth of that. Would you support that? I just don't understand because the fact that you even had to think about it says enough about that question. Because apparently Americans were so, and this is also a thing where I have a hard time figuring out what anybody actually cares about. Before we said Americans were so concerned about the economy, they were so concerned about like the cost of groceries and everything, and now we're like, I think we could actually sustain hundreds and hundreds of billions of economic damage to deport people that, for a lot of these people, they don't even see them every day. You know, people in swing states have these super strong feelings about illegal immigrants that are like in Texas and California. It's like, what?
Yeah, I mean, the reason I had to think about it is because it's actually a nuanced question. Like, what's worth it? What is it worth it to you to just solve the illegal immigration problem, take the economic damage, and have no route out? And I would say probably not, and that's not what we should be doing anyway. I think the better question is, are you in favor of removing people and simultaneously making legal immigration more viable? Or would you just rather keep people in the country and make legal immigration more viable? It sounds like you're in favor of just keeping people in the country, and it sounds like we both agree that legal immigration needs to be made more viable. I am saying I would rather we gently remove and incentivize people to remove themselves from the country, because I agree forceful deportation of 10 to 20 million people is not logistically viable, and we do this the right way.
Why can't we just do in Ellis Island, there were a ton of people that came in. They just wrote a name in a book. Mm-hmm. Well, I know from Cuba, you had the Mariel boat lifts or whatever. Tons of people, tens of thousands of people just came in and they're like, okay, yeah, we'll take it. Why not write a law in Congress saying like, listen, if you're here, go to your office, sign up or whatever, and we're going to figure out a pathway to at least having a green card, since they're already embedded. They're already, like, imagine if you're like a landlord, or imagine if you own a business and all of a sudden like the federal government has just excised half of your tenants or excised half your employees, and it's like, holy shit, I have to wait for all these other people, I guess, like the harm would just be unreal.
I agree, and that's why I'm saying the ideal solution is not to just do one part, let's do all of it at the same time.
But that's not what you're suggesting is impossible, right?
Sorry, why is it impossible
that for every one, like if I'm a landlord and I've got 10 tenants and say I don't know this, but say 4 of them are illegal immigrants, you're going to take one out and then in the next day swap in a legal immigrant?
Oh, no. I'm not saying do it in a single day. This can be drawn out over time. Like,
but businesses and landlords, businesses and cities and people that have these people integrated into the parts of their economy, companies, they can't wait months and months and months with no employees, with no renters, with no...
Yeah, and I'm saying that's why, yes, we have to land the transition properly. And maybe this is something that happens over the course of a year. Maybe over the course of a year, you say, hey, look, people who are here illegally, you get $5,000 to $10,000 to leave the country by the end of the year. Simultaneously, we're going to increase the throughput of a legal immigration system. Hey, businesses, so you know, we staff the IRS, and I know you said we should staff the IRS, I agree, so that we can actually enforce the law, because you're not going to be able to continue to pay people under the table in perpetuity. So we give people a heads up, we give them a grace time to transition, and we do this delicately. It doesn't need to be we push a button and we remove 10 to 20 million people out of the country. I think the framing of that question is like, that's why I had to think of it as like, I mean, I don't really think it's a fair question because that's not what I'm proposing at all. But yeah, I think you pointed out a good trade-off. Like, are we willing to just remove 10 to 20 million people from the country illegally with no alternative? I think we should have an alternative. Let's just do this right.
Oh, that just is not a realistic thing in any way, size, shape, or form. The frustration I have is that these are real problems, and I think we need like real solutions for them. But it's always these like pie in the sky things that like this wouldn't even escape a Republican-controlled supermajority Congress of like, we're going to push a button to deport, not push a button, but we're going to find a way to deport 10 to 20 million people. It's never happening. And then as a result of like entertaining these types of delusions, we just kick the can down the road and indefinitely never actually solve the issue. And it's actually so frustrating because these same people will then show up in 4 years and say, this is a huge problem. And it's like, okay, well, can we actually do something about it? Yeah. Yes, we're going to slowly deport 20 million people while making legal. No, we're not. That's never happening, right?
Well, I maybe just call me an idealist. I think it can happen. I think with
what odds would you, if we were to bet $1,000, what odds would you take for that. Like, I would give you 100 to 1 odds that we're not deporting 10 million people. 100 to 1 odds. They're huge betting odds that we're not deporting 10 million people in the next 4 years. It's not happening.
Yeah, I don't think Trump is going to do it the way he's doing it. I'm talking about the way that we should do it, and I think that the way that we should do it requires generational leadership, and it's totally possible. I don't see anything infeasible.
I don't care about what's possible. A lot of things are possible. 1 in a trillion things are possible. We should go for what's feasible and what's probable. Like, what can we actually do?
So please explain to me what's fundamentally infeasible about overhauling our legal immigration system, providing incentives to illegal immigrants such that they self-deport, stepping up our forceful deportation so that the people who don't choose to self-deport, we do actually have to forcefully deport, unfortunately, and doing this with enough proper messaging in advance so that it can be done properly.
So number one seems to be, so the feasibility for number one is DOA, because it seems like nobody even wants to have a conversation about what legal immigration should look like in the United States, because we don't even know what, I guess, I don't even know what people's actual positions are. So, for instance, if you would have asked me 6 months ago or 4 months ago what conservatives thought about asylum, I would say conservatives don't even believe asylum seekers are real. That's, in my opinion, that's what they would have said. But now, apparently, for white people in South Africa, apparently asylum seeking is like the most important thing ever. And so these people are coming here for asylum, and we're all clapping for that. So I don't even know what a reformation of the immigration system looks like, because I don't even think we've come to the table and begun to discuss. A lot of people are under the assumption, for instance, that we only need high-skill immigrants. But then the H-1B situation popped up. It's like, actually, hold on. I don't think we need medium or high-skill immigrants. I don't want these people at all. And then for people coming from South America or from Mexico, it's like, well, we don't need low-skill labor either because reasons, I guess. So I don't know. So that's the first thing. The second thing, in terms of deporting people, it's a catastrophic impact to start deporting people en masse. If you want to talk about like doing these deportations where ICE is like going into a prison and they find some people that are they don't have good immigration status and they kick them out or whatever, okay, fine, whatever. That's not a huge impact. But if you're talking about people that are just integrated into a community, that are working, that have their kids going to school or whatever, but they're undocumented or illegal persons, and then you start kicking these people out, it's not just even giving money to those people to make them right or whole. I don't even know if we're going to kick them out, kick them out. You're talking about a ricochet effect through these entire communities. You're talking about cars that are going to be abandoned, that aren't going to have payments made on them. You're talking about properties that are going to be abandoned, that aren't going to have rent paid. You're talking about companies that are going to lose employees, that aren't going to have workers. Like, all of these effects are happening for some vague notion of fairness in a country that elected a guy who's a 34-time convicted felon. Not to point anything out in particular about Trump. I'm just saying that it's interesting that we're able to make some concessions on fairness in some places, but then in other places we're like, we have to do this exactly 100% the right way. But that right way could never include some sort of amnesty, even though we essentially did that, like for people coming in through Ellis Island, or the Cuba example was one I gave. There's a path forward where there's a discussion where I think it could happen. We need some kind of amnesty thing. Otherwise, we're never getting rid of these people. These people aren't self-deporting unless you're offering them a ton of money. So we need some kind of amnesty thing. We need some kind of immigration conversation. We need people to come together and have a conversation on this. But instead, it's this, we're going to figure out a way to really deport 10 to 20 million people. And it's like, that's never happening.
Okay, so I feel like maybe there's just a gap in maybe what we think this conversation that we're having right now is meant to do, right? Because I'm not here to defend Trump. I'm not here to rationalize for conservatives. I'm not here to make this a Democrat or Republican thing. I'm here to identify the best possible solutions to the problems that we face right now. What I'm hearing you say is that you're fundamentally pessimistic that some of the ideas that I'm advocating can even be done. I guess I'm optimistic about it. And I think that if we have conversations like this where we can at least identify what the best thing is, we can start changing the political will of the masses so that we can create enough political will to get them done. And you're saying it's infeasible. What I'm hearing is it's politically infeasible. I don't think it's logistically infeasible to do what I'm talking about. I don't think it's logistically infeasible to give people an incentive to leave, because we're doing that. I don't think it's politically infeasible to enforce the law so that companies aren't paying people under the table, because we can do that, or we do it selectively. So let's just do it all the way. I don't think it's politically infeasible to force some people out of the country, although we should keep that to an absolute minimum. Recently, DHS reported that part of the reason that they're giving people $1,000 to self-deport is because it costs $17,000 to force deport. At $17,000, I agree with you. We're not going to do it. And that's why I'm saying let's find this more easeful way to do it. So I think it's just a matter of providing proper incentives, enforcing the law, and increasing the throughput of the legal immigration system. And if you're saying, look, the conservatives are so intractable that it's just not possible, I guess I just disagree. Like, I think it's totally possible, but there needs to be enough public awareness of what is possible. There needs to be enough public desire to do something about it. I do actually think there's enough public desire to do something about this situation. Unfortunately, I think it's been channeled into a lot of animus toward illegal immigrants and just wanting to rain fire and brimstone and kick them out of the country. But I think underneath that, especially for people who are not strongly on the right, is there's probably a majority of the country who says, yeah, we do need some level of deportation. And in fact, there were surveys done around the time of the election saying that people were supportive of some form of deportation. And people just need to be made aware of a better way. So, yeah, I believe it's possible. I think this conversation hopefully helps people become aware and change their mind and become open to that. And that gets channeled into the will of Congress people through the legislative branch, because that's the way government's supposed to be enacted. But, yeah, we're talking about this vague notion of fairness. I'm going to say, again, yeah, it's abstract, but it's incredibly, incredibly important, because right now we're the most divided that we've ever been. There's the least level of public trust. Things are being done forcefully because we can't do things through reconciliation and actual conversation. And if we just give up on the whole project of democracy and communication and doing things properly, yeah, you're right. We're not going to get anything done. But I think it requires us first acknowledging that, hey, look, maybe we can change things, and maybe there's actually a moment right now in the American culture where people are open to change.
Yeah, I wish those conversations would be realistic, I guess, and then maybe they would be. But
let's have the realistic conversation. We're right here.
Let me just add something real quick. So it seems that something you would both agree on is that we should incentivize legal immigration. Am I correct?
Incentivize them.
Legal immigration.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Right. We agree?
I mean, I guess, yeah.
Okay. I think there's a sort of a disconnect on unfeasibility, and I want the viewers to decide what's feasible, but I want you guys to lay out your plans. So, so Stephen, you're talking about fast-tracking the illegal immigrants who are already here toward green cards. Kaizen, if you could go into a little bit more detail of what your plan would be, say you're chief advisor to the president, and you've got Congress majority, you've got Senate, whatever. What would be your ideal plan, and then we can let the viewers decide of what's feasible.
Sure. Okay, cool. So let's say we have a 1-year window to execute this entire transition. And first, we need to let people know what's going to happen before it actually happens. So we tell people, hey, look, we're overhauling our entire legal and illegal immigration system. Over the next year, what we're going to start doing is talking to businesses. We're going to enforce the law. Like, the existing law is fine. We're just going to make it so you can't pay people under the table to work at your businesses. You need to account for that when you think about your labor force planning. You need to account for that when you think about what kinds of goods you produce. Yes, there's going to be some economic disruption, but this is necessary in order to at least reinstate the level of social trust that we actually need to be Americans together. Illegal immigrants. We totally understand why you came here. You're not bad people. We understand that you're just trying to create a better life for yourself. But the way that you came into the country, the fundamental rule upon entry was violated. You came into the country by breaking the rules. It's not fair to other people who are following the rules here in America. It's not fair to other people who have been waiting in line to get into the country. And it's a non-starter. And the reason why America is so great and the reason we want to come here is because we're a nation of rules. So, sorry, but over the next year, we're going to ask you to leave. The way that we're going to ask you to leave is we're going to help facilitate you leaving. Like, logistically, like we can arrange public transit so that we fly people out to their home destination. We can make deals with people in these Central and South American countries so that they accept these people back. Like, that's what we've been doing, obviously, on the most negative way possible with El Salvador, accepting prisoners from here. But we're going to ask you to leave, and we're going to incentivize you to leave with a resettlement payment. It can be somewhere between $5,000 to $10,000 per illegal immigrant. And that gives you time to get your affairs in order. And if you don't do that voluntarily, unfortunately, we're going to have to forcefully deport you at the end of this year. So you have this grace period to figure it out. And then as far as the legal immigration system goes, I agree with Stephen. We've been incredibly inconsistent with our legal immigration system. I think we saw it with the H-1Bs. I think we're seeing it with the white South African Afrikaners. It's not transparent, like what refugee status, asylum status, who gets to be here. It feels like a bunch of pet projects. So instead, we should have a very transparent system with a criteria. And we actually do have a criteria already in our immigration system. And admittedly, I'm not super learned on exactly what the issues are that are making it so inefficient. But the commitment is, hey, if it's a staffing issue, let's get the staffing better. If it's a database and systems issue, then let's solve the databases and systems. But there needs to be a will to do it, not just because we think we wanted to open the doors to legal immigrants, but because we actually need people. As Stephen has identified, we actually need people to be doing these jobs. Let's prioritize the people who have been waiting in line and are willing to do these jobs. And by the way, before we had masses of illegal immigration, we had seasonal workers come in and do these jobs. So it's not like we've never had some sort of system where people from very similar backgrounds were doing these jobs. What's unprecedented is the amount of people who have been coming here illegally. So yeah, I agree. We need to solve this all at once, and we totally can. And I think maybe the Achilles heel in my whole proposal is whether we can actually get Congress to be on board with doing it. But I believe that's possible too. I think it just requires deft leadership.
Cool. Do you want to add anything to your plan? Since he was delivered a more comprehensive plan, do you want to add to yours?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that you're trying to do is you're trying to avoid situations that are politically unfeasible and are economically unfeasible. The reason why the feasibility matters is because there's a lot of idealistic plans that can exist, but like it doesn't matter if it's idealistic. So for instance, I could solve all drug issues right now in the United States if I would just tell everybody to stop doing drugs. If you have an addiction, just stop, right? But nobody's going to do that because they have an addiction. Much the same that like if you're saying we should pass this plan, and then if we pass this plan, everything will be fixed. Well, if nobody wants to pass the plan, the feasibility of passing it is part of the feasibility of the plan itself. When it comes to a path to amnesty for people that are here, the reason why this works the best is because it avoids a whole bunch of really tough economic questions. So, for instance, if you've got a bunch of people that are renting apartment units to illegal immigrants that are now going to have to close up shop because their whole building is emptied because the feds come in and they bust them, or if you've got companies that are relying on a bunch of labor, they might not even know some of these people are illegal immigrants, and they lose a ton of their labor force. All of these small businesses, all of these apartment complexes, all of these places that rent cars or anything else to any of these people, all of these people are going to be hurt in bad ways. So you avoid all of that by doing some sort of path to amnesty, number one. Number two, you avoid very convoluted or very difficult legal questions. So for instance, let's say that there are two illegal immigrants in the United States. Let's say they have kids. Let's say both those kids are 16, 17 years old. Those kids are citizens. Well, what do you do now? Now you're in a weird world where we deport the parents. Do the kids stay here? The kids probably have to go too. And it's like, this just, nobody wants to deal with a situation because it's like, are you really, we had this pop up with the 2-year-old that got, sent away with her mom. And that just puts you in a weird situation in terms of like the legality and the morality of it. There's also another fiscal involvement here where it's like, well, if you have illegals that were here, say like DACA kids, these are people that don't commit crime because the DACA people are registered with the government, and they're people who are in their heavy investment years, meaning we've spent all this money educating them, feeding them, doing whatever else, and then now when they're hitting adult age, for the DACA kids especially, now is when they can start contributing back to the economy by paying taxes and by having jobs and by buying stuff. To ship them out at that point is like, holy shit, we've just educated this person and made them a citizen of the world and have given them the ability to work, and now we're giving them to another country so they can go and work and make money for them. It's just like, why would we do that? We're shooting ourselves in the foot. So the path to citizenship, or at least the path to amnesty or a green card, manages to keep all those people in place, integrated into the systems that they've organically already sorted themselves into, and then it just basically moves us into a world where we can start to account for them legally because now they've all registered for some type of green card status. If you do it on just the green card thing, at the very least you avoid the uncomfortable issue that Republicans have where they're like, well, we don't want them to take over voting majorities in some places or whatever. Maybe you can even reshuffle how you apportion delegates from the House, because some people don't like the fact that if there are more citizens or more people living somewhere, even if the green card holders, whatever, you can figure those things out. I just think that path is a way that protects us, like morally, it makes people feel okay generally. Legally, you're on much stronger standing. Politically, you've got a more feasibility to a plan there. And economically, you're avoiding a lot of the harm from moving people out of your markets. And fiscally, you're accounting for all of your government budgets a lot better. I just think that plan is way better than trying to shuffle 15 million people in and 15 million people out of the economy, in my opinion.
So speaking of shuffling, sorry if I can add something really quick. So Kaizen presented sort of an ideal plan. You did as well. So in the interest of feasibility still then, how would you go about delivering the, like you're saying, green cards for illegal immigrants? How would you choose which ones get it? And, part of on my channel, I've spoken to many illegal immigrants, and they have hearings that are years into the future. So how would you sort of fund it? How would you make this plan feasible of delivering green cards to, correct me if I'm wrong, but millions of people?
I think in general, politically popular plans are plans that fund themselves. So if you really wanted to, you could say we're going to do a path to amnesty for every single person in the United States, and the penalty for being here illegally is going to increase tenfold. And so what you do is, if you're on a path to amnesty and you want to apply for that thing, then for the next 5 years, maybe you've got like a 2% tax penalty that you pay towards your amnesty. So for every illegal immigrant that is now here on a path to citizenship, maybe they pay it, 2% of their paycheck pays to some fund, and from the money that's collected from that can be used for the heightened enforcement measures that go to kick people out or to pay for the programs to integrate these people. And then those things can also be applied, doubly so to to corporations. If we find that you're employing people who are illegal immigrants and you haven't done your due diligence, when an employee works for you, I don't know if you've ever had to fill out an I-9 before or whatever, where they fill out the paperwork and you ensure their documentation and everything. If you've been found to be willfully employing these people, then you've got huge penalties to pay as well. And then all of that can go into a collective fund that kind of pays ideally for the program itself. Not to mention all the additional tax revenue and everything else that's captured by these people being in the country and continue to participate economically anyway. But that's one way you could do it.
Yeah, so one thing before we move on to the next topic here that I'd like for you guys, maybe there's going to be unity, I don't know, but both of your guys' plans involves significant law and order. You're talking about fines, you're talking about deportations. So could we have a quick discussion here about that enforcement? Talking about feasibility, how would you enforce it? How would you enforce it?
First, I just want to acknowledge the plan that Stephen laid out. I can see why he feels it's more feasible because I think it is absolutely less economically disruptive. And yes, I think people are more likely to support plans that don't economically make things harder for themselves. So maybe there's something infeasible about what I'm saying in that it requires more political will to get done what I'm proposing we do. And I'm saying it requires more political will and it also creates more trust in the long term. Whereas I think Stephen's plan, although I think it's better than having everyone here in the country in this limbo status forever, so I think it's better than that for sure, it doesn't require as much political will, but it erodes trust, I think, irrevocably. I think forever it's okay, well, America's just the country where every few decades we have this crisis and we just decide, okay, we're just going to undo the crisis by legalizing everyone who broke the rules. And eventually there's only so many times that you can pull out of that trust blanket before you go default. So what I'm saying is legally, I think is actually quite simple to enforce. It's not difficult to enforce the current laws by saying, hey, we're going to check up on companies, and if you're employing people illegally, then you're going to be hit with a huge fine or maybe even go to prison. And I think to Stephen's point, he said there's going to be a huge fine for people who are still here illegally. So we agree we need to beef up enforcement on something here. So it sounds like it's roughly equivalent there. I think it's very feasible from an incentive standpoint. It's very easy to just say, hey, we're going to pay you money if you leave, and we're already doing that. And I think this is where I'm not confident in my level of knowledge of the legal immigration system and what's wrong with it. But I don't see why this is a fundamentally intractable issue. I just think it's something that people have been focused on. I think a lot of the energy has been focused on illegal immigration, which I actually think is the bigger issue, but I think it should be solved commensurate with the legal immigration issue. So yeah, I don't think there's anything legally difficult about doing this. It requires enforcing the current laws, changing the incentive model, and changing the legal immigration system. I think the hard part, which he's identified, he thinks is fundamentally infeasible. I don't. It's finding the political will to do it. And I would say that the benefit of Stephen's plan is that economically it's much more palatable to the average American. And I would say, he's talked about conservatives being resistant or not willing to govern or all these other things. Yeah, I think fundamentally conservatives probably take a principled position of these people broke the law. We're not going to validate that, period. And I think in order for them to get on board with any plan that I think they can get on board with a plan that incentivizes legal immigrants to leave the country. I don't think they will get on board with a plan that rewards them, essentially, for having entered the country illegally. So I do think my plan actually threads the needle in the middle more effortlessly, because I think many Democrats, I think many independents, most people just don't identify with either party. Again, it's been surveyed that they're in support of some level of deportation. What they're not in support of is ICE kicking down doors and dragging people out. So we need to provide an alternative plan. And I think everyone wants to just feel like a good person. They want to see people who are in the country illegally dealt with humanely, not that they necessarily need to stay here.
Let's talk about Russia-Ukraine. So it was widely seen in the West, the invasion of Ukraine, as unprovoked, and people largely sided with Ukraine. Mm-hmm. However, some perspectives on the war shifted as the U.S. sent nearly $175 billion in aid. So was Putin's decision to invade at all justified, and how could the U.S. have improved its response to the war? I'll go first.
Yeah, I don't think that there was any justification for the invasion of Ukraine. There's a number of issues that people lay out, but I think all of them are red herrings. People can say it was NATO expansionism that did it, but that clearly wasn't the case because NATO has expanded. Russia hasn't gone to war with any countries like Ukraine. It only happened in response to the 2014 ousting of Yanukovych. Some people say that that it was for the denazification of Ukraine, and the Azov battalion is like a few hundred people. This is not true. It's just obviously not true. They had I believe it was a Jewish head of state and a Jewish vice president at the same time. Like the idea that there's some huge Nazi problem in Ukraine has just never been true. Some argue that was because of the ethnic cleansing of ethnic Russians in the Donbass. That's not true. There was an active war that's been facilitated there by Russia for at least 10 years. The reason why they invaded Ukraine is because they wanted to control Ukraine in a similar way that they control Belarus. Putin more or less said this, that they're the same kindred spirit of people, and that he basically wants to see a reformation of like a Soviet Union-esque type nation state between Russia, between Belarus, between Ukraine. I think that the biggest issue that the United States had was we didn't have like a unified response to what we wanted to do. Initially, we were really big on supporting Ukraine, but for reasons and Trump and whatever random stuff, the conservatives started to break off from that and decided that we needed to become isolationists again, I guess, and not have any relationship with anything going on in the rest of the world, unless I guess it's pouring tons of money into Israel for whatever reason. I think that the biggest mistake that the United States made was not to have when I say unified response, I mean that we're unified at home about how we're going to deal with this, and to not have Ukrainians sitting in a ditch waiting on whether or not they're getting artillery shells based on whether or not an immigration bill is going to be combined with foreign support for the war, I guess.
Okay, so what about how we would change, how would you change the response to the war in Ukraine? Like, would you change anything that Biden did? Would you change anything? I assume you'd want to change some things that Trump has done.
I think making greater weapon systems, F-16s and everything else like available to them from the start, I think would have been good. I don't think we should ever utter the word like nuclear anything. The idea that we should allow somebody to bully us around because of nuclear threats is absolute bullshit. And the idea that we need to be afraid of Russia and give them basically carte blanche to invade any country in the world because they have nuclear weapons is insane. I don't think Putin is that suicidal. And all the same arguments that people made about being worried about World War III or nuclear winter would apply the exact same if they were to invade a NATO ally. And I would hope that we wouldn't use the same arguments and abandon NATO as well, although Trump has talked about that and shown a desire to do that a ton. But I think that basically telling Ukraine, listen, as long as you guys want to fight, you have everything that's available to you that you can fight with. Good luck. As opposed to this dishing out selectively weapons over time, depending upon what the political will is at home for it.
Guys, would you like to respond?
Yeah, sure. So first to the question of justification. I mean, the question is like, what does justification mean? Are we talking about moral justification? Are we talking about has there been any incentive provided? Have we provoked them in any way? Look, I don't think there's a moral justification for an invasion. I think it's clear that from just a purely moral standpoint, no, I don't think Putin should have invaded Ukraine. I think there were many options available to him. I think he was opportunistic. I do think that many people have been glazing over the things that America has done to at least give Putin plausible reasons to the international community to invade. So Stephen mentioned the ousting of Yanukovych and our involvement in the Maidan Revolution in 2014. It's like, yeah, that's a plausible reason why Putin could say, hey, you guys have been violating Ukraine's sovereignty. You guys have been turning Ukraine into a Western satellite. Now this is a security threat. Does it warrant him invading? No, but it's something that he can say. Just like if, let's say, Russia was in talks with Mexico to create some sort of Russian-Mexican treaty organization or something like that. Would I say that that's, okay, we should just invade Mexico now? No. Would I say that that is part of a stack of reasons that needs to be addressed, otherwise it's eventually going to lead to military intervention? Yeah, I would say that. So part of my issue is that this like black and white framing of like Putin was completely in the wrong. It's irrational. He's just trying to take more land and reconstitute the Soviet Union. Well, if that's all you believe, then there's no appealing to self-interest and there's no reconciliation possible, and the only possibility is total war, and I just fundamentally don't believe that. I think when we talk about justification here, the better question is, were there reasons why Putin invaded that we could have not furnished him with if we had approached our diplomatic approach differently? And I think yes. I think we've meddled in Ukraine, again, when we talk about the 2014 revolution, in ways that I think would cause any neighbor in the surrounding region to be concerned. And I can totally see why Putin was concerned. And I think rather than subversively supporting a revolution and deposing someone who is more Russian aligned and replacing them with someone who's more Ukrainian aligned, we should have actually been in relationship with Russia. And I think that's one of the biggest failings of our foreign policy agenda. And I think since the 1990s, we've been stuck in this old view of Russia evil, Putin dictator wants to take over the world, next Hitler. We shouldn't even talk to him. And yeah, throughout 2022 and 2023, we saw that agenda be prosecuted to its logical conclusion, which is Biden's not talking to Putin. He's giving weapons to Ukraine. He's agitating Putin. And years later, this war is still going on. It's the bloodiest conflict on earth. And we've been out of pocket for over $100 billion. We weren't any closer to a resolution of this by the end of 2024. So when we talk about justification, it's like, no, I don't think him invading is justification. I think, call me an idealist, I don't think offensive killing of people is ever justified. And there were things that we could have done before to actually prevent this from even getting to that place, or so that even if Putin was hell-bent on getting to this place, we actually would have been on the clear moral high ground, so there was a clear mandate to be unified in our response. And where I agree with Stephen is we've done this half-in, half-out thing. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me, where we're saying we're going to send certain things and then we don't, and then we're saying that we're going to start negotiations and then we're backing into Ukraine's corner again, then we're backing into Putin's corner. It's very confusing. And it's protracted this conflict a lot longer than it needs to. I would have said either at the beginning we need to be like fully we stand with Ukraine, we give them everything that they need. This is now a proxy war through Ukraine. Let's fight it and win. Or we're completely out and we say, look, they're not a part of NATO and it's not our responsibility. And I, frankly, as much as my heart goes out to the Ukrainian people, because it sucks to get invaded. Like, it sucks. They're the smaller country. They don't have the arms to fully resist Putin without our help. It's not our fight. And here we get to a more fundamental disagreement about what is America's role in the world. I tend to take, it's always a spectrum between isolationists and interventionists. I think we've gone too far in the interventionist direction. I think we keep on finding really hollow moral justifications for getting involved in conflicts. And to me, it's just about self-interest. Like, that's the cleanest way to do this. I don't see a compelling reason why it's strongly in America's self-interest to donate hundreds of billions of dollars to Ukraine over any other conflict in the world. There's tons of horrible things going on in the world. I don't see why, we believe that if we don't help Ukraine, then Putin's going to run roughshod over the rest of Europe, and all of a sudden we're going to be next, like Zelensky has said several times. We have NATO. If he invades a NATO nation, then we fight. That's the whole point of the agreement. So countries that are not a part of NATO, we should not be signaling, like Biden was doing, that, Ukraine's going to join NATO, there's no timeline, and then giving Putin some sort of justification he can provide to the world, even if some of the world doesn't believe him. Instead, let's make commitments, let's honor them, and let's not go past them. And I think we've gone past them with no clear rationale.
The 2014 Euromaidan, the idea that the U.S. was involved in that, there's no substantiation to that in any way, size, shape, or form, right?
What was it? Was it Victoria Nuland?
Yeah, but it's a Nuland phone call where all we said was there is a one leader we prefer over the other. That's not substantiation in any way, size, shape, or form that we participated in that. There had been a whole series of protests up to that point, and there were good reasons for the Ukrainian people to be mad. There's no evidence that the United States fomented that.
Yeah, so my understanding is the CIA actually did help foment that. So it was a grassroots revolution, just to be clear, something that the Ukrainian people wanted to do. My understanding is that we did covertly support that.
And and how?
So my understanding is that, I don't know if this is a USAID thing or a separate part of the U.S. of the CIA did this, but that we funded this and we helped provide propaganda to the Ukrainian community to help support this.
Okay, I don't think there's any evidence that's ever been presented of that. The only thing that's ever brought up is that Victoria Nuland phone call a billion times. So that happened all on its own, number one. Number two, the framing of Russia had to invade Ukraine because Ukraine might have joined NATO. Like, what would be the threat to Russia if Ukraine joined NATO? The threat would be that they wouldn't be able to invade Ukraine. What?
Well, the threat is that we can mount weapons there, like
we can mount weapons, and we already have countries that are bordering Russia in NATO.
And not all of them are within striking distance of Moscow.
You don't think that Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania could shoot missiles into Moscow?
No, they're not as close. It's more of an existential threat.
I don't think so. And they're close enough to shoot missiles into it.
And besides that, you're making me respond to a framing that I did not provide. I didn't say that Russia had to invade. I'm just saying it's not even a good justification. I didn't say that this is only a security concern. I do think Putin had his own reasons for invading. I think, yes, part of this is about ethnic Russians, and he's viewing ethnic Russians.
Sure, I'm just going piece by piece. I'm saying for the NATO one, NATO's never attacked Russia, right?
Of course not.
So why does he think that Ukraine joining is magically going to be the time now that NATO is going to strike Russia?
Again, I'm not saying it's sufficient justification. I'm saying it's part of his justification. And
I understand, and I'm attacking that part piece by piece. I'm not saying that alone. I'm just saying that the 2014 funding by the CIA has never been substantiated. The idea that NATO has somehow magically become a threat to Russia, I don't think that's substantiated. What was the tertiary reason? the only reason I can see to invade Ukraine is because he wants to invade Ukraine. I don't know what excuses we gave him or what we could have headed off.
Well, at minimum, look, maybe there's some, and this is obviously hard to substantiate because we're talking about a covert operation that may or may not have existed, and Victoria Nuland's call may or may not substantiate the existence of this covert operation.
Well, to be very clear, the only thing that Nuland call said was that there was one leader who would prefer of another. That leader didn't even get elected after Euromaidan. So, I'm sure we have preferences for leadership around the world all the time. That doesn't mean we're covertly supporting some project to cause a revolution and to oust a leader in a country just because we prefer one over another.
Yeah, and of course, again, with covert operations, it's very hard to substantiate what happened or not.
Yeah, but we wouldn't believe it just because we can't substantiate it.
I'm not saying that I believe it 100%. I'm saying there's a perception, and let's say it is true to any degree. That to me, that's evidence that we are prosecuting an agenda of getting involved in countries that we don't need to be involved in at all. And
you don't think Europe is an interest to the United States?
I'm not talking about Europe. We're talking about Ukraine.
Ukraine is a part of Europe, and I think European sees that as an essential part of European security, right?
Yeah, I'm saying some European countries are in NATO, and we've made commitments, and we've made the assessment that, yes, it makes sense to provide security to them. Ukraine was not one of them, at least not up to this point. Now,
sure, but I mean, they did give up their nuclear weapons, right?
Yeah, they did, and there was a Budapest Memorandum, and there's a reason why we didn't add any enforceability clause, because evidently we didn't find Ukraine to be valuable enough to America's security to put ourselves on the line and say we're going to provide security guarantees. So
it was also probably because it was in '94, literally 3 years after the fall of the Soviet Union, and the United States providing a security guarantee to a country bordering Russia would be seen as an egregious overstep, because the entire world after the fall of the Soviet Union was really scared that a unipolar world was going to see the United States take over every single country. So that makes sense why we wouldn't provide a solid security guarantee there. But what message do we send to the rest of the world if we say, okay, well, you know how these guys didn't have nuclear weapons? Look what happened to them. And now you've got countries in the Middle East that are clamoring for nuclear weapons. I mean, wouldn't they look at Ukraine and go, yeah, clearly we need them because we can't rely on any help from anybody if we don't actually have nukes to defend ourselves?
Yeah, I think you're saying the second order effect is that people would be concerned that, okay, any neighbor can invade any other neighbor and no one's going to step in. And I think that's a reasonable concern. And I would say that's a concern that we contemplate by making a commitment prior to this and say, hey, okay, for the countries where we believe it's important for us to make formal security guarantees, let's do that. We didn't make that formal assessment for Ukraine. And I think it's reasonable to say, yeah, Ukraine was not essential to American interests. Now, post hoc, maybe you believe that they should have been already in NATO. Do you believe they should have been in NATO already?
This is like a weird catch-22. It comes back, it's almost like the immigration question where conservatives or people will say that, well, if we were going to protect Ukraine, they should have been in NATO or we should put a country in NATO. But then it's like, okay, well, are you in favor of expanding NATO? I think all the other people on that side would say no. So I don't know if it would be appropriate for NATO to expand. I do think it would be important to send a clear message that, hey, if you invade a country and try to steal land from them, that's just something we don't really do now in this century. We just don't. That's just not the rules of the world anymore. And if you do that, there should be an unequivocal message from the rest of the world saying you're going to be punished for this harshly.
Yeah, and I think the limits of that should extend to economic sanctions and the things that we have been doing toward Russia. It should not involve some sort of really committed military effort, which is what it would have been required in order for Russia to lose this war by now. And I agreed with you that we need to either be all in or all out. My preference is we're all out. It sounds like maybe your preference is we're all in because we need to preserve the global order. And I'm saying I fundamentally disagree. And yeah, there's countries invade other countries all the time, unfortunately, and it's not our job to police it on principle. We police it strategically with people we have prior agreements with.
Countries don't really invade countries all the time, especially in Europe. It's a pretty exceptional circumstance. I think that's why this is such an exceptional thing. Is that European security, I think, is a thing that fundamentally the West is like, I mean, the West is, right, like Europe and the United States. I think we all have a big interest here, and letting Russia do this over and over and over again, I think is probably doesn't bode well for the future either.
Yeah, so if that's the case, then we need to contemplate it in our commitments. Like, for me, it's actually just as simple as that. Like, either we agree that Ukraine is so important to the global order and we want to protect Ukraine and we give them security guarantees up front. I'm saying there was an assessment made that it's not that important to us. And I think it's actually not even just that it's not that important to us, that Putin has made it clear that he does not want Ukraine joining NATO. Now, you can say that the subversive reason or the implicit reason is because he planned to invade it all the time, which is totally possible. But from my perspective, yeah, I don't want us getting into armed conflict with Russia unless we've already made a commitment. And in this case, we shouldn't have made a commitment to Ukraine, and we didn't, so we don't need to act like we have.
Can I just say, what would you guys both do respectively? If you were in charge to wrap up this war? I believe both of you guys want peace in the region. So what would be the plan? What should we do right now?
you force Ukraine to give Russia another 99-year lease on Sevastopol because they really like that base and they need access to the Black Sea, and whatever part of their Black Sea fleet is left, then they can go ahead and have that, I guess. And then you force them to give back all the other conquered territory, the rest of Crimea included, no-fly zone over Ukraine, and you start shooting down Russian planes. And if Russia doesn't like it and Putin says he wants to nuke people, then you invite him to see if he wants to do it.
Okay.
Yeah, my view on this is obviously Russia is a stronger opponent, but any victory that they would have is a Pyrrhic victory. Like they would lose a lot in order to try to conquer any further. So there is some leverage here. And that's the reason why I think we should not like completely pull out. I think if we completely pulled out, it would be more of a catastrophe for the Ukrainian people than is absolutely necessary. So yeah, unfortunately, they already control a lot of eastern Ukraine and they control Crimea for some period of time now. So unfortunately, we have to cede that land to them. At minimum, hopefully we can structure an armistice, if not an outright peace treaty, so that even if they don't completely demilitarize, at least we stop the active conflict. And I know that the U.S. and Ukraine entered this minerals deal. It's questionable how much we can actually harvest like the rare earth minerals from that minerals deal and create some revenue for both of our parties. But I think at least this signals to Russia that we are ideologically aligned with Ukraine, and any further incursions in Ukraine threaten the economic interests. Whether there should be a security guarantee past that, I think it would depend on the specifics of that security guarantee. I mean, I know Zelensky has been clamoring for a security guarantee, and from his perspective, it totally makes sense. Like he would want something like being in NATO. But again, if the bright line that has been drawn for over 20 years now, is that Ukraine can't join NATO, I think we need to respect that bright line unless we're really willing to fight Russia on this. And I don't think we are, and I don't think we should.
Okay. Yeah, and this is part of why I think these conversations are so essential because, respectfully, saying you're on the right, you voted for Trump, you supported Kamala Harris, you're not exactly saying what, so-called narratives, you're saying, we shouldn't necessarily pull everything out. We shouldn't just stop funding them. And you're saying that, Destiny, you're saying that we shouldn't continue to necessarily fund this for eternity is what you're saying, right? You're not.
No, I think we should fund it for as long as I want to fight. Yes, and I think that the opposite position is an unequivocal, total surrender of Ukraine to Russia. The idea that they would give up the 5 whatever territories plus power plant to Russia, I think is the most catastrophic version of a surrender, basically, that Ukraine could have. I think we should fund them for as long as they're willing to fight.
So to clarify, no budget, right? You're just saying to continue.
Yeah, we haven't given them I think $30 to $50 million. I think in actual cash or loan guarantees. The rest is a bunch of weapons. It's causing a lot of trouble for Russia, and they should be having a lot of trouble. They can't just invade Moldova. They can't just invade Georgia. They can't just invade Ukraine. They can't just get involved in level places all over the world over and over and over again with no repercussion. I think the United States is probably the best poised country to send a message to the rest of the world saying you cannot conduct yourself like this. You shouldn't be able to do it. And if the U.S. isn't going to step in and do that, I mean, I don't know who else will.
Okay. Do you want to, before we move to Israel-Palestine, do you want to comment on his point about funding the war?
Yeah, for me, look, the lens I look at this from is what is serving America's self-interest. I agree that morally it's reprehensible for Putin to be invading these countries in Europe. And at the same time, I don't consider this like some sort of domino effect that eventually will hurt the U.S. I'm just fundamentally not concerned. So I don't see why we should have an infinite pocketbook open for Ukraine here, because I don't think it's worth that much to us to be involved in a fight that we didn't start, we weren't involved in. We may be provoked to a degree, but we certainly don't need to be involved in perpetuity.
Still sticking with foreign policy, Israel-Palestine. So the conflict has extended to challenging the definition of free speech in this country. Where do you guys stand on the State Department's approach of revoking visas for some pro-Palestine protesters, and what can be done to raise the probability of peace in the region?
I'll go first.
Okay.
So when we talk about their approach to revoking visas, we're talking about like Mahmoud Khalil, Mesa Ozturk, these people. I don't like it. I think it's been really opaque. I think it's been really inconsistent. I think they say one reason to the public, and then you look at the legal filings, they state another reason. And I think we need to look at this case by case to see what the failings of this are. So, for example, one of the reasons that they've been citing in public is they're trying to fight anti-Semitism, right? So they're saying that Mahmoud Khalil and Mesa Ozturk are fomenting anti-Semitism. Now, part of the problem here is what is actually anti-Semitism? Technically, it's hatred against Jewish people. But what I see often actually being conflated with hatred against Jewish people is criticisms of the actions of the Israeli government, which I don't think is fair. And particularly in Ramesa's case, as far as I can see, the only evidence that she has of something even in the neighborhood of anti-Semitism is having written an op-ed where she was critical of her university giving money to Israel and wanting them to divest, which I think is a reasonable position for someone to take, even if you disagree on whether they should divest. I think it's okay for her to state that. So the Trump administration, they've been citing this one part of immigration law saying that someone who's here on a green card or a student visa can be removed if they engage in actions that have serious foreign policy adverse, create complications. And that's such a broad clause. And with super broad clauses, especially ones that are given to the executive branch that can be acted on unilaterally, my fundamental concern is not even how they're just using it now, but how it gets used in the future because of the precedent that's being set. If we're going to say that simply writing an article asking your university to divest from Israel constitutes anti-Semitism or has serious foreign policy consequences, then that reason can be used to justify kicking anyone out of the country. I mean, we could have used that to justify people who are critical of the Iraq war and here on some sort of legal permanent resident status and saying, okay, you're back to the country because you're saying Bush shouldn't be invading Iraq and Afghanistan and all these other countries. So yeah, I strongly disagree with the way that they're going about this. And in some cases, I think there's more justification. So for example, with Mahmoud Khalil, he was a lead negotiator for Columbia University apartheid divest, or let's call it Quad. Quad has made statements on social media that is decidedly pro-Hamas, supportive of Hamas. They said that October 7th was a moral, military, and political victory. They've said that, hey, in the face of armed attack, only armed resistance is possible. Whether you agree with those statements or not, it's clearly pro-Hamas. It's clearly sympathetic to Hamas. Now, but rather than bringing up that evidence, like Marco Rubio and his team, they just say something vague like serious foreign policy consequences. To me, if they're going to have a standard, it should be clear, and they should make it super clear with specificity down to the incident every single time every individual has violated that. And that's the reason that we should deport people, not saying, oh, it's anti-Semitism, and then say, actually, it's about foreign policy. And then even when you say it's about foreign policy, you don't actually cite the exact reason. So all these cases are different. Again, in Mahmoud Khalil's case, I'm open to the argument that because he is a lead negotiator for Quad, he is responsible for the statements that Quad made. And it's not just guilt by association, it's responsibility by leadership. But again, the messaging around this has been so poor. I think it's unnecessarily breaking trust with the American people. I think it's actually going to foment more anti-Semitism because the more that people feel like they're getting silenced for arbitrary reasons, the more they're actually going to have animosity toward the group that ironically the Trump administration is trying to protect. I do think we need to protect Jewish people from anti-Semitism, just like we need to protect every group in this country from any form of bigotry. And I think that the way the Trump administration is doing is not right.
My opinion is pretty simple. I think a lot of the anti-Zionism, I think, is just masquerading anti-Semitism. That being said, I don't care. I think that if you want to be anti-Semitic or anti-Christian or whatever, you have that right in America. You have First Amendment protections, even if you're a green card holder, even if you're a visa student. Any deportation that happens for people should be viewpoint neutral, so not in violation of the First Amendment. If somebody's providing actual material support to a terrorist group, meaning they're like sending them money or they're sending them arms, like not actual arms, but like firearms and stuff, then I think there's an issue. But one of the confusing conundrums that we're kind of in now is I think traditionally when a lot of laws are written and people are thinking about terrorist groups, usually you're thinking of non-state actors. So people like Al-Qaeda, you're thinking of these like groups that exist, you know, within countries or between countries or as like entities, you know. Hamas is the government of the Gaza Strip. Whether you think they commit terrorist acts or not, I happen to think they do, but it doesn't matter. It's a government of a place. So if I want to go out and I want to support Palestine, or if I want to support the people in the Gaza Strip and I protest, I'm kind of always going to be supporting Hamas in one way or another. Now, people can say, no, you can support the Palestinians without supporting Hamas, which is true. But like, if I was a visa holder, am I going to want to take that risk of being in a crowd of people supporting people in the Gaza Strip and some other dude has a Hamas sign and I got to be like, no, I don't support Hamas. I just support the Palestinians in Gaza, which means we'll kind of like, you know, maybe Hamas might be there. Like, that's stupid. If you're going to deport people on support for terrorist groups, it has to be material support. It can't be against foreign policy interests, because like Kaizen said, what are we going to deport people in the future for not supporting, like the war in Ukraine, or not supporting, if we have a third or fourth or fifth Iraq war, or if, another Vietnam war, like that's just, it's stupid. It should be viewpoint neutral.
Okay, let's draw a line potentially here. So looking at the events at Columbia, at the Butler Library, for example, do you believe that crossed the line? Do you believe that the people who vandalize and break into...
Yeah, I think that crossed the line. I think if you did that, I think you should be charged with a misdemeanor crime or whatever, and arrested, whatever that is. I don't think you should deport them, okay? College kids, by definition, are crazy. They're crazy. They're college kids. You should be crazy when you're in college. Everybody was crazy. If you weren't crazy from 18 to 22, I don't know what you're doing with your life. We all believe in crazy shit. We're libertarians. We're anarchists. We're communists, whatever. Sometimes you might do some crazy stuff like a sit-in or a break-in or whatever. And if you do that, you should be held accountable. But like at the end of the day, most of these people grow up into reasonable adults. And our foreign students, this is like our best ability to brain drain from the rest of the world, are getting like the best and brightest people to come to the United States and to participate in, like, historically one of the last amazing institutions of the United States. Everybody knows, like Harvard, Columbia, these are prestigious universities and are all over the world. If you do a break-in and you are committing crimes like that, that's bad. And, if you get caught and you charge with a misdemeanor, sure. But, like, we're really going to start revoking green cards or revoking visas from these people? Like, let them do dumb college shit. Let them grow up. I think we'll be okay.
And Trump's rescinding funding to Columbia. Are you against that?
Yeah, that's abhorrent. Again, because it's not, none of this is viewpoint neutral. He's doing exactly what he said, what he accused the government of doing before, which was trying to control colleges and control the types of things that colleges are allowed to do. Like, he wants to revoke these things based on DEI programs or whatever else. Like, listen, if you think that it's a bad program and you think you shouldn't do it, then let the college do it and fail, and let private colleges or your Hillsdales or whatever other colleges rise up in their ashes and outperform them. But again, these are like our most prestigious universities. Why are we attacking something that the entire world looks upon favorably as like a huge success of the United States? You're destroying like some of the best things about this country, although I guess conservatives don't like our colleges or our universities anymore. But yeah, I don't know. I just think it's incredibly sad.
Kaizen, do you want to respond to the the vandalism and what Destiny had just said?
Yeah. So I do think that when someone enters the country and they're not a citizen and they're here on some sort of green card or on a student visa, I think it is reasonable actually to hold them to a higher standard than you would a citizen. And this comes from a more fundamental view that if we're going to have people here in the country, we want people who actually add to the experience of America. So we want people who are upstanding citizens. And I would even say that we could say that a misdemeanor is actually grounds for removing you from here, because in your case, it's a privilege to be here. And that said, I agree with Stephen that the way they're approaching it is not viewpoint neutral. It feels discriminatory. It feels like it's conflating people who are just critical of the actions of Israel with genuine anti-Semites. And I think that this is a double-edged sword. It cuts both ways. And eventually, if Trump wields it this way, the left is going to wield it another way. And no one's going to like that either. But I actually think it's reasonable to say, hey, look, one of the conditions for you being here on a student visa is you actually obey all the laws. You don't get to take over a library. You don't get to stop students from going to class. Otherwise, you need to be on your best behavior, or you don't get to be here. So you're here on a provisional status. Now, yes, students do act stupid at times, but I think something like barricading a library goes beyond that. And I think there should just be super clear expectations laid out upon entry into the country.
You mentioned, Destiny, that you should be able to do anything, but you also mentioned that Palestine and Hamas are linked. So if a college student, a leader of a community group, gets to the center of campus and gathers a coalition that says, I love Hamas, and Jewish students feel unsafe, do you believe that the person who is gathering a coalition and saying, I love Hamas, should be held accountable?
Yeah, absolutely. Held accountable, and that people like me would say that you're gross and disgusting, and I think that's a really horrible foreign policy viewpoint to have. But held accountable insofar as you're going to be prosecuted for a crime or you're going to be kicked out of the United States. No, I mean, this is supposed to be one of the great things of this country is somebody could go in front of a bunch of, black people and say, I love the KKK, or in front of a bunch of Jewish people and say, I love Nazis, or, in front of a bunch of Israeli people and say, I love Hamas, or in front of anybody else and say, this is part of, what makes this country great. You could burn a flag, you can worship veterans, you can, say things that are to some people incredibly offensive and abhorrent, and people can look down on you for it and bully you for it, but you're protected by the law the same.
Okay. And Kaizen, with that same thought experiment, say that this person who's gathered the coalition is on a visa and they're saying those words. They're not vandalizing, but they are saying that they love Hamas, and they're encouraging other people to say they're wearing Hamas headbands, same thing, just encouraging more Hamas activity. What would your response be?
Yeah, I'm actually conflicted, to be honest with you, because in principle, in my mind, we would not allow them into the country if they had done that in another country, right? So if someone had been gathering protests in the UK and saying, I support Hamas, and then they applied for a visa into the United States, we would deny them. We wouldn't let them in the first place. So clearly there's some sort of standard that we uphold for who we allow into the country. We don't say genuinely we support any person becoming a citizen irrespective of ideas. We say that once you're a citizen, you're free to express any idea. So there's a difference between how we treat people upon entry versus how we treat people who are here. My concern is actually more how this could be weaponized if we allow the government to decide, hey, you're now sympathizing with a terrorist and you can kick him out. And in my mind, the Trump administration has eroded confidence that this law could actually be enforced neutrally and objectively if we actually did say that once you're in the country, if you express terrorist sympathies, we're going to kick you out, because they've been very loose with what expressing terrorist sympathies actually is. And I think it's a loophole that could be exploited really badly. So I'm honestly conflicted on it. In principle, I would love it if we said, hey, very, very clear guidelines for you getting any kind of student visa or worker visa or green card. You don't get to violate these guidelines. We're going to kick you out, because this is basically a test period and there's a covenant between you and us, like you're a guest in our home, until you have proven that you deserve to be a member of the family. But yeah, I mean, given the political climate, it's hard for me to say, yeah, I want to empower the Trump administration to do this, because I think they've been abusing it, actually.
Okay. So to quickly clarify, Destiny, you believe that college students should be able to say what they want, and Kaizen, you want more criteria of what would be take to get deported.
Yeah, I want a much clearer criteria than serious foreign policy consequences.
Okay. And Destiny, earlier in the debate, you mentioned sending money to Israel being different than sending money to Ukraine. Could you guys clarify your positions on funding Israel?
I just think that it's just funny that the administration, I guess because old people tend to support Israel in the country, is just like open pocket books when it comes to supporting Israel, with basically no qualifiers or no questions asked. And like now Netanyahu has become more unhinged and deranged than he ever was before. But when it comes to Ukraine, there's like a million strings attached. I just think that's really sad and weird, I guess.
I don't think we should be unconditionally funding Israel. I think it's insane for us to unconditionally fund any foreign power. There should always be conditions attached. They should be clear, and they should be transparent, at least within the administration, if not to the American people as well. There's a difference between wanting to support the Israeli people and supporting the Israeli government no matter what they do. And I think we've now conflated, just like anti-Semitism, we've conflated anti-Semitism with critiques of Israel, and we've conflated every action of the Israeli government with protecting the Israeli people. And I don't think that makes any sense. From this point forward, what I'd like to see us do is actually make our support conditional on some sort of peace plan for what happens after this war. Because that's my concern. It's like, sure, you can say that Israel has a right to defend itself. You can say that Hamas is irrational, that there's a logic of violence. You have to enforce some sort of boundaries in the region in order to make progress. And now, a year and a half later, I think those boundaries have been made pretty clear. And now we need to start talking about how are we actually going to end Hamas? And in my mind, Hamas is not just a political body, it's an idea. And it's an idea that doesn't go away by infinitely bombing the people who hold that idea. So Hamas has been weakened by Israel, and I think that's an effective use of their military up to this point. And they've maybe pacified a bit and are more amenable to negotiations now. And now I'd like to see, what are we going to do to de-radicalize the Palestinian people so that they cast off Hamas as an ideology and a political body of their own volition? For example, after World War II, we dropped literal nukes on Japan, and now we're one of their closest allies. They chose to demilitarize. They put no war in their constitution. I think we actually need to go over the top, U.S. and Israel and other Arab states, in creating a situation that is so good for the Palestinian people that they would never want to radicalize again. And I think if we just keep on infinitely bombing them, they're going to be incentivized to keep on fighting. And I actually think that's self-defeating for the Israeli people. Because now you're in a situation where you need to continually stifle and suppress the Palestinian people. Otherwise, they're going to come back to attack you. So, yeah, I think we need to win hearts and minds. And when I say we, I'm saying I think Israel government in self-interest actually needs to win the hearts and minds of the Palestinian people, because the reason that a lot of them are supportive of Hamas is because they feel like it's their only option. And Hamas obviously facilitates that by killing dissidents in Palestine and Gaza. So I don't think it's too hard to extend some sort of olive branch. And I know that Israel has tried to do this before, like they withdrew from Gaza in 2005. There's been international aid that we've tried to get to Gaza. I think it needs to actually be ratcheted up, not because of morality, but because I think it's actually the most self-interested thing that the Israeli government can do for the Israeli people. And my concern is that Netanyahu is not actually thinking clearly and doing the thing that best serves the Israeli people. And that's my suspicion of any government. We should never conflate a government with its people, because I think a lot of time people in government are more focused on continuing to foment conflict, because in conflict they get to hold on to power. And that's my concern. So no, we should not unconditionally fund them. I don't think we should unconditionally fund any cause in the world.
There are parts that I disagree with, but I think for the most part I broadly agree. I think that the issue right now is that I hate Donald Trump. I think Donald Trump is an idiot, and I think one of the big problems with the idiocy is that he doesn't have like a view for what the Middle East should look like, and I don't think that anybody in the Trump administration right now has a view for what the Middle East should look like. And so without that kind of like macro overhead view, we really have no idea what conditions we would even put on Israel. And yeah, just like infinitely funding them, where Netanyahu is saying like no food for the Gaza Strip, no more aid going in except for real this time, not like it's been reported for the last 2 years, but now like maybe for real they're going to say like no food, no aid. And the infinite aggression campaign, like how many more times we're going to bomb and kill all the Hamas people, like we've been doing this for a long time now. Like the Gaza Strip is essentially flattened at this point. What does the next stage look like? We're basically leaving that in the hands of Netanyahu, who is quite far right, or at least is holding on to a very far right coalition of power right now in Israel. And that future is going to be very scary for the Palestinian people themselves, for Israel in the long term, because they're just basically creating the conditions for another October 7th in the future, and for the broader Middle East and our interests in the Middle East, because this like one sticking point of the Palestinian people causes so much instability and gives Iran like a vector to operate through, and causes like frustrations for everybody, including allies we have in the area, people like Egypt, people like Saudi Arabia, that it's not good. Yeah, but we don't have the leadership or the vision right now, I think, to actually address that issue, unfortunately. So we're basically just unconditionally leaving it to Netanyahu.
I certainly wish we had a lot more time, especially to discuss this topic. I greatly respect and admire both of you. Sincerely, thank you so much for coming, and it's not easy to debate these topics. Everyone knows that. Like at home, it's just not easy. You guys came extraordinarily well prepared. You guys are very well read, and so thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for the conversation. I can be argumentative. I can't help it sometimes. I cut people off. I'm used to screaming a lot, so I appreciate the conversation. Yeah.
I appreciate it, and I really respect you, man. I respect your authenticity. You actually gave me some things to think about. The U.S. support of Ukraine, I was like, yeah, I should know. I should be able to prove that this thing was done, and I don't have that. And this was actually my first live debate, so thanks for taking the time, and thanks for organizing this. This was fun, and I hope people learned something or started to think.
Awesome.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, bro.
Thank you.
Thank you guys so much for watching. We had a very tight window to make this happen, and even after 2 hours, we ran out of time. But it's just a testament to how complex and important these topics really are. Now, if you want to see part 2 with the same guys discussing all different topics, let me know in the comments below, and also let me know what names you want to see next on the show. I welcome all feedback on my questions, by the way, so if there's anything you think I can do better, definitely let me know that as well. Now, whether you think Kaizen or Destiny made the stronger case tonight, here's one argument you should not ignore: your online privacy. Private internet access is the VPN trusted by millions, and for good reason. It hides your IP, encrypts your connection, and works on every major platform. When I'm traveling for episodes of the show, I often have to connect to Wi-Fi in airports, hotels, coffee shops, you name it. Now, hackers love these public networks because your data is exposed. But with PIA, I know I am protected. My IP is hidden, my data is encrypted, and I stay anonymous. One subscription protects unlimited devices, and their no logs policy has been proven in court and independently audited by Deloitte. So even they don't know what you do online. And right now, PIA is offering 83% off plus 4 extra months free. That's just $2 a month to secure your digital life. There is also a 30-day money-back guarantee if you change your mind, but you won't. In a world where data is the new currency, protecting yours should be a no-brainer. Go to piavpn.com/Nate Friedman to claim the deal. Again, piavpn.com/Nate Friedman. Now you just soaked up a ton of political knowledge. Now protect your data, and I'll see you in the next episode.